The cables tangled at my feet like a nest of indecision, the modem blinking steadily as I tightened the last connection. Another fix, another quiet victory. I crouched in the corner of our home office, Vivian's awards crowding the walls, her degrees framed and spotlighted, like curated museum pieces. Mine? A dusty shelf held my prototype router and the faded sketchbook where Signal Core began. No fanfare. No accolades. Just me and my belief in what I built. Vivian used to say I had vision, but it was the kind of compliment you give a child with finger paint. Safe, distant, and utterly without faith. She never said it in front of her friends. Never in public. Out there, she held me like a handbag, something functional, acceptable, but never worth discussing at length. I'd grown used to it. Not numb, but practiced. Her father, Franklin, had never hidden his disdain. He wore it like his cufflinks, polished, deliberate. Quinn, you're wasting your life on that. Experiment, he'd say, like Signal Core was a childish science project, not a network optimization tool quietly powering 4 major e-commerce platforms. I didn't correct him. I learned early that explaining value to someone invested in your failure was an exercise in futility. Vivian adored him. Her world orbited his approval. And she worked damn hard to earn it. Ivy League graduate, finance awards, features and tech executives to watch. And every single time she was praised, I clapped the loudest. Because I loved her. Even when she smirked at dinner parties after I shared a development breakthrough, calling it cute, I swallowed the bitterness. I told myself it was just her way of coping with pressure. Even when she introduced me as the guy with all the ideas but none of the luck, I let it slide. Because I believed in us. And more importantly, I believed in what I was building. Signal Core wasn't just another hopeful app or gimmick. It was a silent backbone, an invisible accelerator hiding beneath bloated systems and inefficient code. I designed it to be the skeleton no one saw, but everyone relied on. I modeled it after myself, in a way quiet, essential, overlooked. Most nights, while Vivian reviewed acquisition deals or prepared pitch decks in her curated glass office, I worked in the garage. My hands cramping from the soldering iron, my eyes blurring after hours of testing compression ratios and latency thresholds. My version of romance was debugging during thunderstorm surges so our beta clients wouldn't drop signal in a power flicker. I didn't expect applause, but I hoped for respect. We used to talk more. Back when she still wore flannel to bed and stole fries from my plate. Before the heels got higher and the titles grew longer and our marriage became a branding exercise. I remember one night, she stood in the kitchen, hair tied back, holding a wine glass she hadn't sipped. You could be huge, you know, she said, quietly. If you just had a real business partner. Someone to polish the edges. I laughed then, more amused than hurt. You mean someone who wears better suits and doesn't have solder burns? She smiled, but didn't deny it. That was months ago. Lately, her compliments had turned into calculations. How scalable is it? What's the burn rate? What's the long-term exit strategy? As if I were a pitch deck she was forced to skim. I answered, not to impress her, but to remind myself I had answers. And yet, even with the silence, even with the quiet dismissals, I held on. Because love, real love, isn't loud. It's not flashbulbs or Instagram-worthy moments. It's staying, believing, pouring coffee at 2 a.m. because she has a call with Singapore, or rewiring the breaker because she tripped it running 6 monitors at once. Still, I'd be lying if I said the cracks weren't spreading. One night, I overheard her on the phone. He's supportive, but not ambitious. You know? Like, he's fine being average. I think he likes being invisible. Her voice was hushed, but not enough. I sat in the dark hallway, gripping a box of Ethernet cables, staring at the closed door. Invisible. The word burned more than I wanted to admit. I didn't confront her. What was there to say? She wasn't wrong. I had been invisible. I let her cast the light, thinking it was love, thinking that my silence was strength. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I looked at Signal Core's server logs that night with new eyes. The metrics weren't average. We'd cut data delivery lag by 28% across 3 test markets. Our tech had survived 4 DDoS attacks without a single drop. One of our anonymized modules had been quietly integrated into a health records platform used by 2 major hospital networks. And nobody knew. Because I hadn't told them. Because I'd played small. Because I let their spotlight blind me into thinking my shadows meant nothing. Not anymore. That night, I stayed up until dawn mapping out a new structure. Shell companies. Licensing strategies. A stealth network of clients. I started using a pseudonym, QM for all new partnerships. The name sounded like someone who didn't wait to be introduced. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care if Vivian noticed. Because whether she saw me or not, I had decided to be undeniable. And shadows, after all, only exist when something's standing in the light. The valet barely acknowledged me when I pulled up in the black Honda Civic. I caught the brief flick of his eyes toward the Bentley in front of me, then back to me like I was a mistake in the parking lot. I handed over the keys anyway, straightened my tie, her favorite blue one, and walked toward the Stratmont rooftop, where the party lights pulsed against the skyline like a heartbeat made of glass and steel. It was Vivian's big night. Senior partner, tech acquisition lead. A title so heavy with prestige it practically bent gravity. I should have felt proud. I should have felt included. Instead, I moved through that rooftop like a ghost walking through a world that didn't see him anymore. The air smelled like money, imported champagne, dry-aged sliders, perfume brands I couldn't pronounce. Her firm had spared no expense. Gold-rimmed flutes, live string quartet, rooftop heaters glowing like little artificial suns. It was the kind of party meant to whisper, "You've arrived," into every camera lens. I adjusted my sleeves, took a breath, and walked in. She saw me across the space but didn't come. She smiled that small, camera-ready smile and gave me a nod, polite, distant, like I was the barista who remembered her order but nothing more. I tried to tell myself it was because she was working the room, strategizing, networking. But then the introductions began. Vivian floated from circle to circle, her voice charming and confident. "This is Javier from London. He manages our AI analytics team." A kiss on the cheek. "This is Priya, our wizard in fintech deals." A gentle hand on the arm. "Oh, and this," she turned slightly, the way she always did before the lie, "this is, well, you must already know Nathan. He's the one who brought us that German cyber defense acquisition." Laughter. Applause. I wasn't introduced. Not once. Even when I stood directly beside her as she greeted an incoming executive from Zurich. "This is my," she paused, barely glancing at me before redirecting, "Sorry, give me 1 second. I just need to check on the bar setup." She brushed past me like wind. I watched her gold heels disappear behind a waiter balancing a tray of shrimp ceviche. I moved to the edge of the rooftop, letting my fingers wrap around a glass of something expensive and tasteless. From that vantage point, I could see the whole city, its glittering chaos, its indifferent sprawl. I used to dream of moments like this. A room full of polished people, clinking glasses over shared ambition, nodding at me like I belonged. But in this crowd, I was invisible. I checked my phone. No messages. I opened the Signal Core dashboard out of habit. Live systems looked good. Ping rates optimal. 2 new requests had come in through Trintle's systems, our anonymous defense front. I closed it. I wasn't here to work tonight. I was here to support my wife. When she finally returned to my side, it wasn't to acknowledge me. It was to refill her drink. She leaned in and whispered, "You should smile more. People are noticing." I blinked. "Noticing what?" "That you're sulking," she said, already turning. "This is a celebration. Don't ruin it." I smiled. I smiled like I had rehearsed it in a mirror 100 times. I nodded and sipped my drink. I watched the way she laughed with Franklin, her father, who stood by the corner fireplace like he owned the sky itself. He spotted me and raised his glass, barely. A gesture so small it might have been accidental. I didn't return it. Then came the toast. It started with clinking glasses. A soft chime spreading through the rooftop as servers passed around fresh champagne. I saw her step onto the small riser they'd set up near the ivy-covered wall, her golden dress catching the light. She looked radiant, powerful, unstoppable. She cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming tonight. This moment means everything to me. I've dreamed of leading a division like this since my early days in finance, and to stand here tonight as Stratmont Capital's newest senior partner and tech acquisition lead, it's overwhelming." Polite applause. Smiles. Camera flashes. "I want to thank my team," she continued, eyes scanning the crowd like she was painting it with validation. "Javier, Priya, Nathan, you are the heart of this machine. My father, Franklin, you've always believed in me." Another pause. And finally, she turned toward me. "I want to thank my biggest challenge, my husband, Quinn." Heads turned. "You've shown me exactly what not to do in business." Laughter. Actual laughter. It started in pockets, then rippled outward, slow and cruel. She didn't flinch. Which is why I'm thrilled to announce she held her glass higher that Stratman Capital is acquiring Signal Corp and folding it into our firm under a new leadership structure. My breath stopped. I froze in place, not because of the words, but because of the timing. With real leadership at the helm, she added. More laughter. Even louder this time. Franklin smirked, nodding like he'd just closed the deal of the year. My mouth went dry. My hands felt disconnected from my arms. I didn't say a word. I didn't storm out. I didn't throw the glass or shout or demand the microphone. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth. She had rehearsed this. Maybe for days. Maybe with Franklin's help. Maybe this whole party was never about her promotion. It was about my erasure. I set my glass down on the edge of the table. It wobbled for a second but didn't fall. Then I smiled. The same kind of smile I used to give her when we were poor and hopeful, when we dreamed of changing the world together. But this smile had weight. Purpose. I turned and walked off the rooftop. No one followed me. No one called my name. I was just a silhouette slipping between bodies and balloons, laughter still ringing in my ears like gunshots in an empty room. By the time I reached the parking lot, the valet had already brought my car around, probably hoping for a tip. I handed him $5 without looking up, climbed into the Civic, and pulled away from the tower of glass where she stood on a fake stage in front of borrowed power. Let her toast. Let them laugh. I had code to write, a system to protect, and a name no one saw coming. The sound of laughter stuck to me like wet paint. I could still hear it as I drove home, each mocking chuckle an echo in my head, bouncing off everything I thought we'd built. The lights of the city blurred through the windshield, but I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry yet. I was empty, like someone had pulled the plug and let everything drain out of me all at once. Vivian's voice played on loop. My biggest challenge, my husband, Quinn. You've shown me exactly what not to do in business. And then, like a dagger twisted for sport, which is why I'm thrilled to announce we're acquiring Signal Corp and folding it into our firm, with real leadership at the helm. I had been publicly executed without a bullet. Just a smile. Just a toast. I parked 2 blocks from our house. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to wake the neighbors with the sound of the garage door. Maybe I just needed to feel the cold bite of night air in my lungs. I walked slowly, every step sinking with the memory of someone's laughter. I think it was Franklin's. That short, satisfied huff of amusement he used to give when I dared to share ideas at dinner. He never believed in me. And now, he'd helped orchestrate my fall. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could. The house was dark, which meant she wasn't home yet. She'd still be basking in applause, sipping champagne, probably telling some hedge fund manager how gracious I'd been about the acquisition. I stepped into the kitchen and stood in the silence, the hum of the fridge the only sound, low and even, like a lifeline. I didn't flip the light on. I didn't need to see the pictures on the wall or the neatly stacked awards on the shelf to remember what this place had become. Hers. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled my laptop from my bag, and opened Signal Corp's dashboard. Everything was green. Stable. Active. Productive. Our clients, real clients, were still using our core systems. If they'd felt even a tremor in performance, we would have heard about it in minutes. But they didn't. Because nothing had failed, except the illusion that I was small. Vivian thought Signal Corp was weak because I never paraded our wins. I kept our biggest contracts private, behind layers of NDAs and protective shells. What she never knew, what no one in her smug circle of asset managers and acquisition vultures knew, was that Signal Corp had been restructured under a different parent name. Trintel Systems. That little experiment she thought she could fold into her firm? It didn't belong to me anymore. Not on paper. I'd sold controlling interest to a silent board composed of 3 longtime friends, tech veterans, and angel investors who believed in what we were building. I kept my position as founder and chief architect, but the shares were split. The real value was hidden where no acquisition team would think to look. She didn't know that one of our modules had just gone live within Stratman's infrastructure 6 weeks ago, under a license agreement brokered by Trintel, not Signal Corp. She didn't know that her firm had already signed a 5-year license for our security framework, which meant any attempt to absorb us would violate contract law and trigger default penalties her firm wasn't prepared for. She didn't know, because she never asked. But tonight changed things. She hadn't just embarrassed me. She declared war. I sat there, bathed in the soft blue light of the laptop screen, and started writing. Not code. Not emails. A plan. A map. A step-by-step breakdown of exactly how to respond without ever raising my voice. First, a press release. Not a direct rebuttal, no. That would look emotional, reactive. No, this would be a quiet unveiling of Trintel Systems' new partnership with the Department of Defense. Just a small blurb on tech sites tomorrow morning, noting that we've been awarded a development contract for encrypted civilian military communications infrastructure. Enough to catch attention. Enough to make Stratman's legal team freeze. Then, a timed update to our investor dashboard, reflecting our most recent valuation, $180 million. Audited, verified, and recorded. Far beyond what Vivian or Franklin had ever imagined. I kept it quiet on purpose. Let the world think we were struggling. That way, they wouldn't see the pivot coming. I drafted a second document, an internal letter to Trintel's board suggesting we send a formal cease and desist notice to Stratman Capital if they referenced any integration of Signal Core without formal negotiation. I didn't hit send. Not yet. I just wanted to know it was ready. By the time I heard the front door open, the plan was already outlined. My coffee had gone cold, and the first hints of dawn were threatening the edges of the windows. Vivian came in humming, the click of her heels sharp against the wood floors. I didn't turn. I didn't need to see her face. "Oh," she said casually when she saw me. "You're up." I didn't respond. She walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter like nothing had happened. "It was a good night," she said. Everyone loved the toast. "Everyone except the person it was about," I said quietly. She sipped. "Oh, come on. You know how these things go. It's just optics." I turned to face her then. Slowly, calmly. "You called me a liability." She rolled her eyes. "It was a joke. Lighten up. You announced the acquisition of a company you don't own." "I will own it," she said, setting the bottle down, her tone clipped now. "Our team already filed the paperwork. Stratman will handle everything. You'll get paid." "I don't need your buyout," I said. "Signal Core isn't for sale." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Quinn, you're adorable. You don't have a say anymore. You signed the IP over to the company, right? And if you didn't, well, your name's still on everything. It'll come back to you in court. We've got a legal team that wins for sport." I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because this was the moment I realized she truly didn't know. "I don't own the IP anymore," I said. "It's under Trintel Systems." She blinked. Signal Core is a shell now. The real product, the modules, the platform, the architecture, it's housed elsewhere. And it's protected. Her smile faltered. "And as of tomorrow, Trintel will be publicly announcing our defense contract. So if Stratman even breathes the word acquisition again, you'll be hit with national security violations and contract breaches. Your firm's lawyers will be too busy explaining themselves to the Pentagon to worry about me." She stared at me, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw something crack. Not fury. Not arrogance. Fear. "You're bluffing." I stood, picked up my laptop, walked past her. "You called me a dropout. A joke. You used my name as a punchline in your big moment. But what you didn't realize," I said as I stopped at the stairs, "is that while you were celebrating your climb, I was building the mountain beneath you." I didn't wait for her reply. I went upstairs and closed the door behind me. She'd thrown the first stone thinking I wouldn't throw back. She was wrong. The house was silent by the time I returned to my desk. The faint creak of floorboards above me told me Vivian had finally gone to bed, probably after downing 2 glasses of wine and staring at the wall. She didn't try to stop me when I walked away earlier. Didn't follow. And that silence? It was a new kind of victory. Not loud, not explosive. Just quiet confirmation that I'd finally stepped out of her spotlight and into my own. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I had too much to do. When your enemy believes they've already won, that's the best time to finalize your endgame. And I had no intention of letting her strike twice. I opened 3 windows on my screen: Signal Core's backend, Trintel's legal directory, and the secure message portal we used with the Department of Defense. Every keystroke was deliberate, each tab a piece of armor being SEC. Vivian thought she had pulled off a corporate coup, that by announcing the acquisition of Signal Core during her toast, she'd created a momentum that couldn't be reversed. But what she didn't know, what no one in that perfectly lit rooftop crowd knew, was that Signal Core was no longer the core. It was a skin, a decoy, a name built to be underestimated. The real operations had shifted months ago into a restructured and renamed entity, Trintel Systems. Back when I realized that she was more interested in folding me into her corporate ascent than building with me, I started taking steps to protect what mattered. I'd brought in two of my most trusted contacts, David Ling, a cybersecurity savant who'd once ran encryption for a major telecommunications firm, and Kira Maddox, an IP attorney whose last 3 cases ended in corporate settlements totaling over $70 million. We met under the guise of a garage startup refresh. What we actually did was engineer an invisible migration. Bit by bit, every part of Signal Core, its code, its assets, its infrastructure, was relocated and secured under Trintel. The licenses? Renegotiated. The server locations? Obscured. Ownership? Reassigned to a trust managed by Kira's firm. And Vivian had no clue. I logged into Trintel's client portal and reviewed the recent activity. The Department of Defense had finalized their onboarding checklist. Encryption testing was scheduled for Friday. A second module for remote infrastructure reinforcement was flagged as high priority by another client, a Fortune 100 energy firm that had quietly contracted us through a third-party vendor. Trintel's reach was growing, and the most powerful part? It looked like a whisper on paper. Just another supplier in a sea of invisible architects. I opened the embargoed press release, the one I'd prepared weeks ago in case Vivian, or someone like her, tried to make a move. The headline read, Trintel Systems secures defense contract for civilian encryption infrastructure, cites breakthrough in low-latency security transmission. Beneath that, the draft contained a brief but potent paragraph. The company, co-founded by technologist Quinn Locke, has maintained a low-profile presence while pioneering encryption frameworks currently deployed across finance, healthcare, and defense. No boasting, just facts. Enough to make Stratman Capital pause. Enough to make any firm that considered an acquisition think twice. I scheduled the release for 10:05 a.m. Eastern. Not too early. Just enough time for Stratman's team to begin their morning with coffee and a heart attack. After locking the release, I turned to the acquisition terms. Not the ones Vivian smugly slid across the table in that rooftop joke of a deal. No, these were real terms. Drafted by me. Only this time, they weren't for Signal Core. They were for Stratman's cybersecurity assets. Through a shell company, I had quietly bought up several key patents their division had failed to renew on time, oversights from a team too busy with champagne to notice what was slipping through their fingers. Those patents? Now held by Trintel. That gave us legal leverage to pursue acquisition of the entire portfolio if we wanted. And I wanted. I sent a message to Kira. All systems prepped? We're ready. She replied in under a minute. They'll panic. Don't blink. I didn't plan to. By 4:30 a.m., I was running simulations through our internal load test. I watched as virtual users pushed every corner of the infrastructure, looking for cracks. None appeared. The systems held. Resilient. Secure. More than I could say for the house I lived in, where the woman upstairs had planned my professional funeral behind a clink of glass and polite applause. The bitterness tried to creep in, but I wouldn't let it. Not now. Not after everything. I didn't need revenge. I needed precision. Control. The kind of control that only comes when you stop trying to explain yourself and start letting your results do the talking. I stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee Vivian liked her strong, with almond milk. I took it black. Always had. I set her mug down on the counter just as I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She came down in her silk robe, moving like nothing had happened. Her face was composed, calm, like she convinced herself that last night was just branding strategy, not betrayal. She looked at the mug, then at me. You didn't sleep. No, I replied, sipping my coffee. Had some things to take care of. She eyed me cautiously, sensing something off but not able to place it yet. I figured we'd talk this morning. About the merger. There won't be a merger, I said plainly. Her smile tightened. Quinn, be reasonable. Reason left the room the second you used me as a punchline, I said, walking past her. You wanted the world to laugh at me. You didn't think I'd already prepared a statement of my own. She turned to follow me, her eyes flashing. What are you talking about? I pulled up the scheduled release on my phone, tilted it toward her. This goes live in 5 hours. Trintel Systems. Defense contract. Public exposure. The whole world will see what you tried to absorb without understanding. She read the headline, then again slower. Her face shifted. Anger, confusion, then dawning realization. Trintle is yours? Trintle is mine, I said. And so is everything that powers your division. Without my license renewals, Stratman can't legally deploy half the tools it uses in client networks. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. I told you once, I continued, voice low and steady, that you can't build empires on people you don't respect. You didn't listen. You built yours on the idea that I was forgettable, that I wouldn't fight back. She gripped the counter. You're going to ruin me. No, I said. You ruined yourself. I just stopped protecting the lie. The clock on the wall ticked past 5:12 a.m. The sky outside began to pale at the edges. A new day forming. A different one. One where I wasn't the man behind the scenes anymore. One where I no longer watched her from the shadows, waiting for a scrap of recognition. I walked back to my desk and closed my laptop. My work was done for now. Upstairs, she was still standing by the coffee. Silent. Finally seeing the difference between the man she mocked and the man she underestimated. And while she slept off the last of her delusion, I had already built the firewall that would keep her world out of mine forever. The next morning began like a performance. At precisely 9:01 a.m., the glass doors of the private office suite slid open with a hiss, and Vivian walked in as if she'd rehearsed the entrance. The heels, those red-bottom ones she wore for big deals, clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her charcoal gray deal dress hugged her frame in all the right ways, and her eyes sparkled with the sheen of confidence that came from believing the world still bent in her favor. Behind her was Franklin, postured like a war general inspecting enemy territory, flanked by two attorneys I recognized from Stratman's litigation department. None of them smiled. "Morning," she said sweetly, sliding a crisp, leather-bound folder across the conference table. "You're going to love this deal, Quinn. I promise." I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I tapped a key on my laptop, bringing the large wall monitor to life. The screen lit up with my desktop, orderly, deliberate, waiting. I looked up at her, and then at Franklin, who gave me a nod that was more dismissal than greeting. They thought I was cornered. They thought this was just a formality. They'd show up, serve me their acquisition proposal, and walk out with my life's work. And maybe even my signature on a severance agreement if they were generous. I could practically feel the smugness radiating off them. Vivian leaned forward, like she was about to sell me a dream. The terms are generous. Full absorption of Signal Corps into Stratman's tech division. You'll walk away with a cash payout, vested equity, and a year of advisory consultation. Think of it like getting paid to do less. Franklin added, "You're lucky we're offering anything after what you pulled with that press release." Spooked a few board members. I tilted my head. It wasn't meant to spook. It was meant to inform. Franklin snorted. "Don't play coy. That announcement was calculated. You blindsided us." "No," I said, finally sitting back. I protected what was mine. Vivian's eyes narrowed, just slightly. I could tell she hadn't expected calm from me. Rage, maybe. Defensiveness. But not this. I nodded at the monitor. "Let me show you something." Slide 1. Signal Corps' current valuation. $180 million. Verified by 2 independent audits and supported by recent infrastructure license sales. I watched Franklin's brow tighten. Slide 2. The client list. Not names, of course, we protect those. But the logos of their parent companies told the story. 3 Fortune 100s, 2 in Europe, 1 stateside. I let them read. Let the silence stretch. Then slide 3. The Trental Defense contract, signed, sealed, classified. But the contract ID and the government seal were visible, enough to show I wasn't bluffing. I turned the laptop slightly, revealing a browser tab open to Stratman's internal infrastructure audit log. "Your firm's been using our architecture for nearly 10 months, I said. Encrypted packet acceleration, firewall load balancing, and predictive routing. You signed the license through a third-party vendor. Our tech already runs behind your systems." Vivian's mouth parted, just slightly. Franklin leaned forward. "You're bluffing." I clicked a file. An email chain from Stratman's internal IT director confirming the integration last November. "Am I?" He stared at the screen like he was reading the terms of his own defeat. "See," I continued, "Signal Corps wasn't failing. It was hiding. And you just tried to buy something that your firm is already renting at a premium." One of the lawyers finally spoke. "Even if that's true, it doesn't protect you from strategic acquisition. You're still vulnerable under standard merger clauses." "I'm not merging," I interrupted, voice calm. I'm not for sale. But your division might be. Vivian laughed. A short, breathless laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Excuse me. Slide 4 appeared, Trintle's acquisition proposal. Not for Stratman itself, but for its cybersecurity portfolio. The language was sharp, and the numbers were precise. Your firm lost 3 patents last quarter. We acquired them. We own the rights to Stratman's compression cipher algorithm, the idle data diagnostic protocol, and the failure redundancy matrix you're still marketing as proprietary. We sent a courtesy notice this morning. Your legal team will get it in an hour. Franklin sat back, stunned. The lawyers looked at each other, visibly uncomfortable now. Vivian's face changed. That practiced mask began to crack, and for a split second, I saw her reach for the old strategy, charm. Quinn, she said, softening her voice. This doesn't have to be ugly. We're partners. We can find a middle ground here. I smiled faintly. I'm sure we could have. Before the rooftop stunt. She flinched, the memory like a slap. This isn't revenge, Vivian, I said. This is correction. You made me the lesson. Now you're living it. Franklin stood up, jaw clenched. This is war, Quinn. No, I replied, calmly rising to my feet. This is business. You're just not used to losing. He stormed out. One lawyer followed. The other stayed behind for a second too long, probably weighing job security versus ethics, then turned and left as well. Vivian stood, but slowly. Her fingers touched the edge of the table like it was the only solid thing left in the room. You played me, she whispered. No, I said, gathering my laptop. You ignored me. There's a difference. She took one last breath, trying to summon her composure. But it didn't come. She walked out without another word. And I stood there, the only sound in the room the gentle hum of the monitor still displaying my final slide. Some threats aren't visible until it's too late. The room felt like a held breath as I advanced the next slide. It glowed across the screen in stark contrast to the mahogany-paneled walls and chrome accents of the boardroom, casting pale light across the confused and increasingly pale faces staring back at me. There were 7 of them now. Vivian, Franklin, the 2 lawyers, and 3 of Stratman's top-level executives who had arrived 15 minutes late and expected a smooth negotiation, not a coup. Slide 1 had already shattered the room's illusion. Signal Corp's valuation was far beyond what they had assumed. Slide 2 had chipped away at their composure with proof of our high-level client base. Slide 3 had introduced the contract with the Department of Defense. Now, Slide 4 would bury them under the weight of what they never thought to question. I clicked again. The screen displayed a countdown timer, 47 minutes and 18 seconds. That's the time left until a scheduled press release goes live across national tech and business media outlets, I said, my voice level. It outlines Trintle Systems' acquisition of 3 patents previously owned and now expired by Stratman Capital. It also highlights our recent federal defense contract, an award that required a thorough security clearance and a federal-level due diligence process your team didn't even know was happening. Silence. Then the scraping of a chair leg as Franklin stood up slightly, only to sit right back down as if realizing he no longer had the right leverage to leave without appearing weak. I continued, slowly, methodically. You came here expecting me to surrender, to hand over a company you assumed was on the brink. A company you believed you could swallow whole with a polished press release and a few term sheets. But you never paused to ask what Signal Corp had become. I looked directly at Vivian. Her expression was unreadable now, not cold, not confident, just calculating. I knew that look. I'd seen it in her eyes when she pitched to investors, when she prepared cross-examinations during her consulting work. It was the face of someone trying to regroup after stepping on a landmine. Vivian, I told you once, I said, tone quieter now, just above a whisper, that what you underestimate will eventually outgrow you. I gave you chances, years worth. I supported you, built systems while you built speeches. And when you thought you were the sun, you asked me to be a star that only shone when you needed light. But I was building something in the dark, something you didn't even think to look for. Slide 5 illuminated the wall. It showed a simple graph, one line representing Stratman's current projected cybersecurity revenue curve, the other, Trintle's, based on existing contracts and upcoming deals. The lines intersected in 7 months. Then Trintle's line soared past. Verified data. Conservative projections. One of the executives, a tall woman with silver earrings and a sharper mind than the others, finally spoke. These numbers are real? I nodded. Verified by Renshaw and Banks. I'll provide the audit trail. We don't inflate. She turned to Vivian, then back to me. Why are you here, then? Why show us this? Why not let us fall blind? Because I don't want Stratman to fall, I said honestly. I want it to evolve. But not with the people who thought they could steal from me and mock me in public while doing it. Franklin leaned forward now, and I could tell he was still trying to re-establish dominance, still clinging to the belief that men like him didn't lose in rooms like this. Let's talk turkey, Quinn. Everything has a price. I raised an eyebrow. You mean like how my reputation had a price at your daughter's promotion party? Vivian flinched. No, I said flatly. This isn't about price. This is about positioning. I walked around the table slowly, not with arrogance, but with the deliberate calm of someone who already knew the outcome. I placed a folder in front of each person, 7 copies of an internal proposal drafted by my team and reviewed by Kira. The folder title read, Proposed Strategic Realignment of Stratman's Cybersecurity Assets, Trintel Systems Partnership Agreement. Not a buyout, not a merger, a partnership, with Trintel holding 51% control of the cybersecurity division. I watched the expressions change as each person scanned the front page. The lawyer on Vivian's left blanched. The silver earring executive blinked, her jaw tightening in thought. Franklin scoffed under his breath. Vivian didn't react at all. She stared at me, but I saw her hand tighten around her pen. You'll maintain face, I said, voice steady. Stratman won't collapse. This deal keeps the lights on. You'll spin it as a strategic pivot. Trintel brings in the innovation. Stratman brings in the resources. Your shareholders won't panic. And if we say no? Franklin asked, his voice hollow with the exhaustion of someone who knew he had already lost. I clicked the final slide. It wasn't numbers. It was a curated list of emails. Excerpts from internal correspondence where Vivian and Franklin joked about my intelligence, where they referred to Signal Corps as Quinn's hobby, and laughed about me being too naive to know I was being used. I hadn't hacked anything. These were forwarded to me by someone inside Stratman, someone who'd seen enough. I don't want to release these, I said, but I will. And once they're out, this board won't be deciding anything because you'll all be too busy dealing with a PR meltdown that paints Stratman as a firm that mocks founders while profiting from their innovations. The room stilled. Vivian spoke now. Softly, carefully. You did all this behind my back. I met her gaze without flinching. You did everything in front of mine. She looked down, as if searching for something to say, some last-minute salvage play, but no lifeline arrived. No one jumped to her defense. Franklin sank back in his chair, and the silver earring executive leaned forward, finally. I recommend we table this for internal review, but from where I'm sitting, the numbers don't lie. This deal isn't a loss. It's a parachute. Vivian opened her mouth, but no sound came. For the first time, she wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't even in control of her own board. I gathered my laptop, slid my own folder back into my case, and walked toward the door. Press release goes live in 22 minutes, I said without looking back. I'd have your PR team ready either way. Just before I stepped out, I heard the executive say, get legal on this now. If we can't beat him, we need to be on the right side of this. The doors closed behind me with a soft hiss. And just like that, the boardroom where they planned my funeral had become the venue of their quiet surrender. The sun was climbing higher by the time I returned to my own building. Not just a home office anymore, a proper headquarters. We'd signed the lease on the top floor of an old converted foundry, brick walls and steel beams still scarred with stories from a century ago. Now, it held the heartbeat of Trintel. What once began in my garage had grown into something no one could ignore, not even those who tried to erase me in a single night. As I stepped through the door, Kira was already there, seated in the war room with her tablet lit up and notes flying across the screen. She didn't greet me with a smile, she never did during moments like. Because their options are partner with the company that's already eating their infrastructure, or face breach of contract lawsuits, patent disputes, and federal inquiries they can't afford. She glanced at me. They'll spin this as a smart alliance. But we both know what it really is. A rescue. No, she said, setting the tablet down. It's a hostile takeover disguised as mercy. I nodded slowly. That felt more accurate. 30 minutes later, we were joined by David, our systems architect, and June, our head of operations. Each of them knew what was at stake. Vivian and Stratman thought the press release was the final twist in this drama. But it wasn't the end. It was the doorway into the real power shift, one they hadn't even seen coming. Kira passed around folders, digital and physical. We move now. This is the acquisition package for Stratman's cybersecurity portfolio. After last quarter's negligence, their patent lapse cost them major credibility. We've already secured 3 of the crown jewels, Pulse Protect, PhantomNet, and Echo Trace. David tapped his pen. With those alone, we can replicate 80% of their in-house protection suite. But if we pull the trigger on the rest of the division, June finished the thought. We control the market narrative. And that's what this was about now, narrative. Because in business, power isn't just built on contracts and systems. It's built on story. And up until now, Stratman's story was that they were the aggressive, elite firm absorbing startups and stamping their logos over the brilliance of others. They were the ones who picked winners and erased origins. Vivian had spent her career making sure the spotlight only ever fell on her. But now, her story would change. She wouldn't be the woman who ascended. She'd be the woman who underestimated a man too quiet to clap back until it was too late. We finalized the offer packet. It was structured as a leveraged asset swap, disguised under a licensing extension deal. Clean, surgical, no headlines needed. By the time the press would catch on, we'd own the skeleton of their cybersecurity arm, and Vivian would be giving interviews about strategic recalibration and lean innovation alignment to explain away the blood loss. By noon, we'd sent the paperwork. By 2 p.m., their reply came. It wasn't Franklin. It wasn't one of the board members. It was Vivian. Her email was brief. 3 sentences. Quinn, we acknowledge receipt of Trentle's proposal. The board will accept the terms under the outline structure. There was no apology. No clever closing line. Just surrender. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not with satisfaction, but with something heavier. Not regret, but reflection. I remembered the first pitch deck Vivian ever helped me edit. We were still living in a shoebox apartment with cardboard for a coffee table. She had used highlighters on the margins, circled my clunky phrasing, added stars beside lines she liked. You've got something here, she had said back then. You just need someone who knows how to package it. But somewhere along the way, she stopped packaging me and started preparing to replace me. I forwarded the confirmation to Kira. She replied within 5 minutes with a signed digital receipt and a line that made me smile, even if only for a moment. Welcome to your empire. The following morning, Trentle Systems quietly acquired Stratman Capital's cybersecurity division through an asset-based integration agreement that bypassed headlines and lawsuits. By the time the ink dried, their tech stack had been rebranded under our modular framework, and our licensing tags were embedded in over 60% of their proprietary systems. Vivian called me later that afternoon. I considered not answering, but I did. Congratulations, she said. You got what you wanted. I let the silence hang before responding. What I wanted was respect. And if you just waited? No, I cut in. You don't get to rewrite it now. You toasted me like a cautionary tale. In front of your colleagues. Your friends. My name was your punchline. I miscalculated, she admitted, her voice stripped of its usual lacquer. No, I said again. You revealed who you really were. That wasn't miscalculation. That was clarity. She didn't reply right away. I could hear her breathing through the line, like she wanted to scream but couldn't afford to. I didn't think you had this in you, she said finally, quietly. That's the problem, I said. You never did. I ended the call. Not because I hated her, but because I no longer needed her to understand me. The following week, Trentle's silent partnerships began surfacing through a cascade of favorable press leaks. Major outlets picked up the story. Startup secures defense and corporate wins while rival fumbles patents. Quiet tech powerhouse reshapes security sector. There were no quotes from me. Just data, quietly doing what I'd always done, letting the work speak louder than the noise. At a private industry event, I ran into one of Stratman's junior partners. He clapped me on the shoulder, smiling like we were old friends. She never saw it coming, he said with a chuckle. Honestly, Quinn, we all thought you were just her +1. I nodded. So did she. The man laughed, raised his drink, and wandered off. I didn't follow. I just stood there, looking out over a sea of well-dressed executives, thinking about how close I'd come to fading into the background forever. But I didn't, because I stopped waiting to be seen. And instead, I built something they couldn't ignore. Vivian had the spotlight, but I had the stage. The first cracks showed the next day. Franklin appeared on a niche finance podcast, doing his best impersonation of a man unfazed by a storm. We've entered a transitional phase, he said, adjusting his cufflinks on camera. It's all part of the strategic evolution at Stratman Capital. Our partnership with Trintel Systems allows us to optimize our innovation landscape. He never mentioned me by name. Not once. That would have been an acknowledgement of defeat. Instead, he called it a realignment, like it was his idea all along. The host nodded politely, probably pretending to understand a word of it, while Twitter lit up with side-by-side charts showing the truth. Stratman's cybersecurity branch had been absorbed, not partnered. It was a dismantling masquerading as progress. And behind the scenes, their phones were on fire. By midday, Kira forwarded an email chain that had been anonymously leaked to us. Internal communications from Stratman's middle management, VPs and department leads is suddenly unsure of their job security, wondering how long they had before Trintel started cutting. One thread from a project manager simply read, "I thought we were the predators." But the biggest surprise came from Vivian. She didn't show up to the Monday morning debrief her team had scheduled with ours. Instead, she sent a resignation letter. 3 lines long. No excuses. No pleas. Just a formal stepping down, effective immediately, with a standard severance clause request that Kira immediately flagged as denied pending internal ethics review. I read the letter 3 times. This wasn't Vivian's style. She wasn't a runner. She was a strategist, a chess player. If she was walking away from her crown jewel, it meant something deeper had broken. I didn't reply. That same afternoon, Franklin requested a one-on-one meeting. Kira and David offered to join, but I declined. This one I wanted to do alone. Not for ego, for clarity. We met at a neutral location, a corporate club where I once wasn't allowed past the reception desk without Vivian vouching for me. This time, the host greeted me by name. Mr. Locke. Right this way. Franklin was already seated in a private room with dark paneling and quiet lighting, sipping a scotch that looked untouched. His posture was still straight, still practiced, but his eyes had lost their spark. He nodded when I entered. Not out of respect, out of resignation. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I assume this isn't a social call." He smiled faintly. "It never is in this business." I took my seat across from him, folded my hands on the table. Said nothing. He cleared his throat. "You embarrassed us." "No," I replied. "You embarrassed yourselves. I just stopped covering for it." He nodded slowly, acknowledging the hit. Vivian was wrong. About the toast. About you. She let her pride get ahead of her judgment. I didn't see it at the time, but Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Don't rewrite history now. You saw it. You encouraged it. You clinked your glass. He didn't argue. Just looked down at his drink, swirling it once before setting it aside. "She's leaving the city," he said. "Moving to Chicago. Her brother's firm made an offer. Different sector. She's going to pivot away from tech." It hit me in a way I didn't expect. Not pain, not satisfaction, just finality. She was running because the room she once controlled no longer answered to her. Because her last move in a game she thought she'd won ended with her queen off the board. "She'll be fine," he added. "I'm sure she will," I said. "She always lands on her feet." He leaned forward now, his voice lower, more deliberate. "I came here to ask you something. Not as an opponent. As a father." I tilted my head. "Careful. That's a role you've never played with me." He didn't flinch. "Let her leave with dignity. Don't release the emails." I studied him for a moment. This was the same man who once told Vivian to aim higher when I brought her flowers for finishing her first client pitch. The same man who introduced me as the Wi-Fi guy at a holiday party full of investors. And now he sat across from me, asking for something he never offered me. Mercy. "They're already archived," I said. "Not released. I don't need them anymore." His eyes flicked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I've already won," I said. "And I'm not interested in scorched earth. I'm interested in building something that lasts." He leaned back slowly. For the first time, I saw respect, not affection, not warmth, but something close to acknowledgement. "You're not the man I thought you were." "No," I said, standing. "I'm better." I left him there with his untouched scotch and an ego too bruised to salvage. Outside, the winter wind cut across my face, sharp but invigorating. I didn't feel heavy anymore. The weight of their doubt, their ridicule, the night spent wondering if love could survive dismissal, all of it was gone. Back at Trintel, our team was already preparing for the next chapter. We had more contracts lined up, more hires planned. The silence from Stratman meant they were bleeding, but they weren't stupid. They wouldn't challenge us again. The market had shifted. We weren't the garage experiment anymore. 2 weeks passed before I saw Vivian again. It wasn't in a boardroom or across a courtroom. It was in the most unexpected place, the airport. I was waiting in line at a coffee kiosk in Terminal C, heading to a leadership summit in D.C. to speak on a panel about innovation under adversity. She stood 2 spots ahead of me, her hair shorter now, wearing a simple blazer and flats. She looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in energy. She turned and saw me. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I gave her a nod. Nothing more. She stepped aside and waited until I had my drink. "I heard you're speaking at the summit," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "I am. You'll do well." "Thank you." There was a pause. "I was wrong about you," she said. "You were wrong to me," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." She nodded. "I've started therapy." I didn't respond. She added, "I'm sorry. Not for losing. For what I did to you. How I made you feel." It was the first real apology she'd ever given me. I sipped my coffee. "I hope Chicago treats you well." She smiled faintly. "Take care, Quinn." And just like that, she walked away. No breakdown. No grand scene. Just a woman who lost the spotlight and finally saw what had been in the shadows all along. Back at the summit, I stood in front of a room filled with executives, founders, analysts. They expected case studies, graphs, numbers. But I started with a single sentence. "My name is Quinn Locke, and the only thing more powerful than being underestimated is knowing exactly when to stop asking for permission." The room was silent. Then it erupted in applause. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Heavy cream cardstock with an embossed navy crest and my name. Not just printed, but written by hand. In careful calligraphy, Mr. Quinn Locke. There was no return address on the front, but I already knew where it came from. Stratman Capital, the company that once tried to bury me with a smile, now wanted me to stand at their podium. Inside the envelope was a formal invitation. "You are cordially invited to speak at the Stratman Capital Leadership Summit on recognizing overlooked innovation." I reread the line twice, letting the irony settle in. Stratman, the firm that mocked my work, tried to consume it, then surrendered to it, now wanted me to serve as a symbol of innovation they'd championed. No acknowledgement of the war we'd fought. No mention of Vivian. Just a carefully designed rebranding of reality. Kira laughed when I showed it to her. "They really think this makes them look progressive," she said. "Like they weren't on the wrong side of the story a month ago." "They want a redemption arc," I said. "And they think I'll write it for them." She leaned forward. "Are you going?" "Absolutely." She blinked. "Seriously?" I nodded. "Not for them. For the ones watching who've been underestimated. For the founders no one clapped for. For the men and women who were told they were wasting time chasing something no one else understood." She grinned. "Then let's write a new kind of keynote." The summit was held at the Helix Grand Hotel, the same venue where Stratman used to throw its summer galas. I remember being there once, years ago, standing awkwardly in a rented suit while Vivian introduced me to colleagues with lines like, "He's working on something in tech, very underground." This time, I entered through the speaker's entrance. No name tag. No wait. My assistant had sent my bio ahead, along with my media kit. I was ushered to the green room, where soft leather chairs and bottled water awaited. A far cry from the folding chair by the bar they'd offered me before. The room filled quickly with executives and analysts. The air buzzed with chatter, but not the performative kind I remembered. This wasn't a celebration. It was a showcase. A chance to identify power before it passed them by. And I was no longer invisible. I caught sight of Vivian before I stepped on stage. She sat in the 5th row, center aisle, wearing a navy dress and no jewelry, her hair pulled back. No entourage. No notes. Just her and a quiet expression I couldn't read. She wasn't speaking today. That much I already knew. Her role in the company had been reduced to a consultant title with no direct reports. Franklin had retired last week, to focus on wellness, they said, but everyone knew he'd been nudged out. My name was announced. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was measured, curious. Like the audience was trying to decide what kind of man I would be once I stood under the lights. I stepped onto the stage, no notes in hand, no teleprompter. Just me. And every word I'd waited years to say. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Quinn Locke, and I used to be a silent partner in every room I entered. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was surrounded by people who were too busy talking to listen. A few chuckles. Mostly stillness. For years, I built systems in the dark. I watched others get credit for the structure I designed. I watched opportunities pass because I didn't wear the right suit, didn't attend the right school, didn't stand next to the right last name. I was labeled a dropout, a placeholder, a man with more ideas than sense. I was locked in now, even Vivian's. But here's what I learned. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean consent. And being overlooked isn't the same as being wrong. I paced slowly across the stage. They called my company a hobby, an experiment, something to be folded into a larger, more serious brand. And when I refused to play along, they laughed. Publicly. Proudly. A few heads in the crowd turned toward Vivian. She didn't move. They thought that moment broke me. What they didn't know was that I had already built something stronger than any applause they could offer, a foundation they were already standing on. Now the tension was palpable. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't bitter. I was stating facts. And those facts held power. Signal Corps, and now Trental Systems, operates behind some of the largest infrastructures in the world. We're the backbone no one noticed until the building started to sway. And today, I'm here not to celebrate being noticed, but to remind you all of something vital. I paused, letting the words breathe. Innovation doesn't always look like a pitch deck or sound like a standing ovation. Sometimes it looks like failure. Sometimes it sounds like silence. But if you're building something real, something lasting, it won't need validation. It will validate itself. I stepped back to center stage. So to those watching, those who've ever been dismissed or talked over or underestimated, I want you to hear me clearly. You don't need a spotlight to matter. You don't need applause to be undeniable. You just need to keep building quietly, persistently, relentlessly. Because eventually, the world catches up. I didn't wait for applause. I left the stage just as calmly as I arrived, walking down the steps, past rows of still faces. It wasn't until I reached the end of the aisle that the clapping began, slow, hesitant, then building into something real. But I didn't turn back. Outside the ballroom, I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding in a way that wasn't anxiety but adrenaline. The kind of rush that comes not from proving people wrong, but from finally proving yourself right. Vivian followed a few moments later. She didn't speak immediately, just stood beside me, staring at the wall like it had something more interesting to say. That was powerful, she said. Wasn't meant to be, I replied. It was meant to be true. She nodded. I deserve that. I shrugged. You earned it. A pause hung between us. She turned to me, eyes softer than I remembered. You really built something, Quinn. No, I said. I became something. And for the first time, she didn't correct me. Later that night, back in my office, I watched the video of the speech being shared across social media. Thousands of views. Dozens of captions quoting lines I hadn't planned but spoke anyway. One stood out. It read, he didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. Vivian's firm had invited me to be a symbol. Instead, I became a mirror. And what they saw staring back was the man they tried to erase, still standing, still building, and no longer in anyone's shadow. It didn't happen overnight. It never does, no matter how loud the headlines or how sharp the fall of those who once laughed. True victory is quieter than people expect. It's not confetti or fireworks. It's steadiness. It's walking into rooms that once dismissed you and watching the people who built walls pretend they were doors all along. It's hearing your name spoken with a new weight and knowing you didn't beg for it. You earned it. 1 year after the summit, Trental Systems went public. The IPO exceeded expectations by every metric that mattered. Triple valuation. Oversubscribed in under 4 hours. Wall Street Journal called us the ghost architect of cybersecurity, a headline that would have embarrassed me 5 years ago, but now felt accurate in the most poetic sense. We had never chased hype. We'd built beneath it. Beneath the noise, beneath the arrogance, beneath the Vivian Hawks of the world who thought quiet meant irrelevant. I didn't make a speech on IPO day. I didn't ring the bell. I let June handle that, our COO, whose fingerprints were all over the operational miracle we'd become. She stood on the balcony in a simple black suit, smiled for the cameras, and said, "We're just getting started." And she meant it. Trental wasn't about one man anymore. It was a machine powered by people who had once been overlooked, now leading departments that rewrote industry benchmarks. Vivian? She kept her promise and moved to Chicago. She joined a real estate tech firm, something softer, safer, a quieter stage. Occasionally her name popped up in digital features about pivoting and leadership, and once I even saw her listed as a guest panelist at a small entrepreneurship forum. I didn't watch the video, but someone on my team told me she spoke with more humility than they remembered. Maybe that was growth. Maybe it was just bruising from a fall she hadn't seen coming. Either way, I no longer kept tabs. I didn't need to. She was in the rearview now, blurry and distant. Franklin retired completely. No podcasts. No op-eds. Just vanished into whatever gated community would have him. I imagined he still swirled whiskey and told stories that conveniently left my name out. That was fine. I didn't need space in his version of events. I had already reclaimed my own. The house Vivian and I once shared sold to a young couple expecting twins. I left behind a few things: the desk where Signal Core began, the vintage router I soldered by hand, the coffee mug with the faded print that read code like nobody's watching. Artifacts of a man who had been willing to be unseen for too long. I bought a loft overlooking the harbor. Minimalist. Quiet. Peaceful in a way success doesn't usually allow, but I'd earned the right to make noise when I wanted and to choose silence when I didn't. I spent my mornings walking to the office, rain or shine. No drivers. No entourage. Just earbuds and black coffee, thinking about architecture, not just code, but human architecture. The people who stayed. The ones who left. The fragile scaffolding of trust, loyalty, vision. Every founder thinks they'll be judged by what they build. They forget they're just as much judged by who they let build it with them. I brought on 2 interns that year, both from non-traditional backgrounds. One had dropped out of college after her scholarship was pulled. The other used to work construction by day and learned Python by night on borrowed Wi-Fi. I gave them full-time contracts before the year was out, because talent isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it whispers. And I had learned to listen for whispers. At a leadership dinner one fall evening, an older executive leaned across the table and said, "Quinn, you know you could write a book. Make millions more telling your story." I smiled politely. I'd rather live a better one. He laughed, thinking it was modesty. But I meant every word. See, the victory wasn't the money. It wasn't even the recognition. It was the peace. The kind that sits on your shoulders like sunlight after years of rain. The kind that no headline, no IPO, no applause can deliver. It's when your worth no longer requires explanation. When your story is no longer edited by other people's insecurities. I got a letter around Christmas. Handwritten. The return address said Chicago. It was from Vivian. No envelope perfume. No signature flourish. Just plain paper and ink. Quinn, I won't take up much space. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were building. Not just the code, but the way you held yourself. The patience. The vision. You were never invisible. I just didn't know how to see. I hope this chapter of your life is kinder than the ones I helped write. V. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't need the closure, but I appreciated the honesty. Maybe people don't change completely, but some learn how to carry their damage without cutting others with it. That was enough. One night in late spring, I stood by the office window while the city hummed below. Kira came in with a bottle of wine and a tired smile. "You know," she said, handing me a glass, "a year ago today, we were just hoping Stratman wouldn't sue us into oblivion. And now?" I asked. "Now they forward our white papers to clients like they wrote them." We clinked glasses. As we sipped, she added, "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd signed that deal? Let them fold Signal Core in like they planned?" I nodded. "Sometimes. And I wouldn't have been me anymore." That was the truth of it. Signing that deal wouldn't have just cost me my company. It would have erased the part of me that believed in slow building things. In letting work speak when words failed. In not needing the room to clap as long as the structure held. That was the core of who I was. And I'd rather be the quiet man behind a fortress than the loud one standing on a stage built by someone else. Eventually the lights dimmed, the guests left, the cameras moved on to the next founder to watch. But Trentle stayed. Signal Core stayed. I stayed. And every time I heard someone refer to me as just a dropout or Vivian Hawksex, I smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. They were still using my systems. Still logging into networks I built. Still protected by code I wrote in a garage while they drank champagne and laughed. And that was enough. I didn't just win. I became undeniable. At family company's Christmas party, my wife's sister got a BMW $65,000 car and a promotion. I got a $2 bill and a now jobless t-shirt. Everyone laughed, even my wife. I drove away. Then my wife's dad, the CEO, got an email. Turn on the news, he shouted. What they all saw make them turn pale. You know how they say timing is everything? Well, whoever they are apparently never stood under a crystal chandelier worth more than most people's cars, watching their CEO father-in-law hand out Christmas presents like some twisted corporate Santa Claus. But there I was, nursing a whiskey sour that tasted like expensive regret, surrounded by enough fake snow to make a Disney movie jealous. The Whitmore Dynamics Christmas party was always a production. Gerald Whitmore didn't do anything halfway. Not mergers, not acquisitions, and definitely not holiday parties. This year's theme was Winter Wonderland meets corporate excellence, which basically meant they dumped a small country's GDP into making our glass atrium look like Elsa's fever dream. 20-foot Douglas fir in the center, imported from somewhere that probably required 3 different environmental permits. Fake snow machines working overtime, because God forbid we rely on the actual December weather outside. And that chandelier, oh, that magnificent beast of crystal and pretension, hanging above us like a glittering sword of Damocles. I should have seen it coming. Should have read the room when Gerald kept glancing my way with that shark smile of his. Should have noticed how the conversations died when I walked up to the bar, or how Marla Knox from HR suddenly developed a fascination with her phone screen every time I passed. But no, I was too busy being the good company man, the loyal husband, the guy who built the backbone of this whole operation while everyone else played politics. Sophia looked radiant tonight, I'll give her that. Her silver cocktail dress caught the light just right, and she had that glow people get when they're exactly where they think they belong. She was over by the dessert station with her sister Tessa, both of them giggling like they were still in high school instead of pushing 30. Tessa had this way of throwing her head back when she laughed, all dramatic and attention-seeking, like she was auditioning for a rom-com nobody asked for. Ladies and gentlemen, Gerald's voice boomed through the sound system, cutting through the jazz quartet and the ambient chatter of 200 employees pretending to have fun. The man had a voice that could command a boardroom or sell ice to Eskimos, which, considering tonight's theme, felt oddly appropriate. If I could have your attention for just a moment. The crowd turned toward the makeshift stage they'd set up near the tree. Gerald stood there in his $1,000 suit, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch of our little corporate family. Behind him, a projector displayed the Whitmore Dynamics logo in festive red and green, because subtlety was apparently not on the company credit card. As we celebrate another record year, Gerald continued, his arms spread wide like he was blessing the masses, I want to take a moment to recognize the outstanding contributions of our team members. Record year. Right. Record year built on the middleware I designed, the routing protocols I'd optimized, the compliance engines I'd coded while everyone else was busy networking and brown-nosing. But sure, Gerald, tell us all about this record year like it happened through executive vision alone. The DJ, some hipster kid with a man bun and an ironic mustache, killed the music on cue. The timing was so perfect it had to be rehearsed. Tessa practically bounced on her toes, clutching Sophia's arm like she was about to receive the Nobel Prize instead of whatever nepotistic nonsense was coming her way. Tessa Whitmore, Gerald announced, and the crowd erupted in polite applause, has shown exceptional leadership, creative vision, and dedication to the Whitmore family values. Family values. There's a phrase that could mean anything and nothing at the same time. In Gerald's vocabulary, it usually translated to born with the right last name and willing to smile for the cameras. The ribbon box appeared in Gerald's hands like a magic trick. Tessa squealed, actually squealed, like a teenager getting asked to prom, and practically skipped to the stage. The crowd ate it up. Cameras flashed from every angle, because apparently this moment needed to be documented for posterity. Or Instagram. Hard to tell the difference these days. Tessa opened the box with theatrical precision, gasping at the BMW key fob like she'd never seen luxury before. Which was rich, considering she'd been driving daddy's cars since she was 16. But the crowd didn't know that. The crowd saw a young executive being rewarded for her hard work and innovative thinking. And with this promotion to Vice President of Brand Strategy, Gerald continued, his voice dripping with paternal pride, comes all the responsibilities and privileges that our senior leadership enjoys. VP of Brand Strategy. The girl who'd spent the last 6 months posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn and calling it market research was now a VP. The same girl who thought synergy was a type of yoga and pivot was something you did in basketball. But hey, family values, right? The confetti cannons went off like we were celebrating New Year's Eve, sending streams of gold and silver paper floating down like expensive dandruff. Some landed in my whiskey sour. I picked out a piece shaped like a star and flicked it onto the marble floor, where it joined about a million others. Sophia caught my eye from across the room and gave me that look, the one that said, "Be happy for my sister," mixed with, "Don't you dare make a scene." I raised my glass in a mock toast, because what else was I supposed to do? Stand up and read my resume out loud? List every patent filing with my name on it. Explain to the room how the technology stack they were celebrating literally wouldn't exist without me? That's when Gerald's eyes found mine across the crowd. That predator smile spread across his face like oil on water, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the air conditioning they were pumping through the vents to combat all that fake snow. "But wait," Gerald said, his voice taking on that game show host quality that rich people use when they think they're being charming. "There's one more gift to give out tonight." The crowd turned to follow his gaze, and suddenly I was the center of attention. Great. Just fucking great. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the catering staff paused with their silver trays, sensing drama in the air like sharks smelling blood. Gerald waved a gift bag in my direction, not wrapped like Tessa's box, just a plain bag from some high-end store. "Come on up here, son," he called out, and the son dripped with just enough mockery to make sure everyone heard it, but couldn't quite call him on it. I walked through the crowd like I was walking through molasses. Every step felt deliberate, measured, while conversations resumed in hushed whispers around me. I could hear fragments. "Poor guy, saw it coming, about time," and realized that half the room knew what was happening before I did. Gerald handed me the bag with a flourish that probably looked generous from the back row, but felt like a loaded gun up close. "Open it up," he encouraged, and the crowd pressed closer like they were watching a public execution. Which, in retrospect, they kind of were. Inside the bag, a crisp $2 bill and a black t-shirt folded with military precision. I lifted the shirt and shook it out, the fabric falling to reveal white block letters that might as well have been written in neon. "Now jobless." The laughter started somewhere in the back and rolled forward like a wave, gaining momentum as it hit the marble and bounced off the glass walls. It was the kind of laughter that feeds on itself, growing bigger and meaner with each echo. Even the jazz quartet stopped playing to stare. Sophia's laugh was the one that cut deepest. Not because it was the loudest, though it was, but because of how she reached over to pat my chest afterward, like I was a good dog who'd just done a particularly amusing trick. "Oh, honey," she said, loud enough for the nearest 20 people to hear. "You should have seen your face." I stood there holding that shirt, feeling 200 pairs of eyes on me, listening to laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Gerald watched me with the satisfaction of a man who'd just won a chess game he'd been playing for months. Tessa clutched her new car keys and giggled behind her hand like we were at a comedy show instead of a professional gathering. The smart play would have been to laugh along, to make some self-deprecating joke about finally having time for my hobbies, or now Sophia can't complain about me working late. To turn their cruelty into crowd-pleasing humor and walk away with whatever dignity intact. Instead, I folded that shirt with the same careful precision Gerald's people probably used to plan this little performance. Placed it back in the bag, closed the top, took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "Thank you," I said, loud enough for the room to hear, but quiet enough to sound sincere. "This is exactly what I needed." The laughter faltered, confused by my tone. Gerald's smile flickered like a bad connection. Because "thank you" wasn't in their script, and sincerity wasn't supposed to be my weapon of choice. I walked toward the valet desk with measured steps, past Gene Park, who mouthed sorry, with genuine regret in his eyes, past CFO Owen Pike, who raised his champagne glass like he was toasting my funeral, past Marla Knox, who suddenly developed an urgent need to check her clipboard. "Sir?" the valet kid asked, probably 19 and working this gig for beer money, looking nervous about getting caught in whatever corporate drama was unfolding behind us. "The gray sedan," I told him, handing over my ticket. "Take your time." No one followed me, not even Sophia. She was too busy accepting congratulations for her sister's promotion and playing the part of the loyal corporate wife. The laughter had resumed behind me, already moving on to the next conversation, the next joke, the next moment of manufactured holiday cheer. But as I waited for my car, keys jingling in the valet kid's nervous hands, I couldn't stop smiling. Because they thought they'd won. They thought public humiliation was the end of the story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. The garage beneath Whitmore Dynamics felt like a concrete tomb, all echoing footsteps and fluorescent lights that buzzed with the intensity of angry wasps. The cold December air bit through my suit jacket as I walked toward my car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic that looked embarrassingly out of place next to the parade of German luxury sedans and electric penis extensions parked in the executive section. But that old gray sedan was mine, paid for with honest money, not daddy's trust fund or corporate kickbacks disguised as performance bonuses. The valet kid handed me the keys with the kind of careful politeness you use around someone who might be having a mental breakdown. "Have a good evening, sir," he said, like he was defusing a bomb instead of returning car keys to a guy who'd just been publicly humiliated by his boss/father-in-law. "Thanks, kid. You too." I tipped him $20, money I probably shouldn't have been throwing around, considering I was now officially unemployed, but he'd been the only person all evening who treated me like a human being instead of entertainment. The garage door opened with a mechanical groan that sounded like the building itself was relieved to see me go. I pulled out into the December night, watching the Whitmore Tower shrink in my rearview mirror until it was just another collection of office lights trying to make themselves important against the darkness. The party was still going on up there in their Crystal Palace. Probably would until 2 in the morning, because nothing says executive leadership like drinking on company time while your workforce goes home to their mortgages and student loans. My phone started buzzing before I hit the first traffic light. Text after text lighting up the dashboard like a Christmas tree made of corporate condolences and drunk executive emojis. Owen Pike sent a martini glass and a laughing crying face. Marla Knox went with the classic thinking of you followed by a prayer hands emoji, because apparently losing your job was now something that required divine intervention. Even some of the junior engineers were chiming in with various versions of "dude, that was brutal," and "sorry man." I hit the silence button and watched them all disappear. Fuck their sympathy. Fuck their after-the-fact courage. Where were these people when Gerald was setting up his little comedy show? Where were they when I was getting thrown under the bus in front of 200 witnesses? Probably thinking about their own job security and wondering if they'd be next on the chopping block. The roads were slick with that kind of winter moisture that makes everything look like a black mirror. I took the long way home, or what used to be home before I started sleeping in motels and planning for exactly this moment. The route took me past the Millfield River, where the city lights reflected on the dark water like a broken necklace some rich woman had thrown away in a fit of rage. Seemed appropriate, considering how my own life had just shattered into expensive, glittering pieces. I thought about every late night I'd spend in that office building, every weekend I'd sacrificed to Gerald's urgent deadlines that somehow always coincided with his golf tournaments or family vacations. 7 years of building their digital infrastructure from the ground up, 7 years of making Gerald look like a visionary leader when really he was just a trust fund baby with good hair and a talent for taking credit. The middleware layer that handled all their client communications? Mine. The routing protocols that kept their data flowing smoothly between departments? Also mine. The compliance audit engine that Gerald loved to brag about during federal contract negotiations? Surprise! That masterpiece came from my keyboard too, coded during a particularly inspired bout of insomnia, while Sophia complained about me working too much. Family excellence, Gerald had called it during his presentation to the Pentagon. Family excellence. Like the Whitmore gene pool had somehow produced technological innovation through pure bloodline superiority instead of relying on the contractors they treated like disposable assets. I stopped at a red light next to a bus stop where someone had graffitied "Eat the Rich" in dripping red letters. Subtle, but I appreciated the sentiment, especially considering I'd just been fed to said rich people like chum to sharks. The light turned green, and I accelerated past a homeless guy with a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." I made a mental note to circle back. After tonight, we might have more in common than I cared to admit. That's when I started laughing. Not the polite corporate chuckle I'd perfected over the years, but real laughter that started in my chest and bubbled up like champagne shaken too hard. Because they thought they'd broken me. They thought public humiliation and a joke t-shirt were the end of my story. Gerald probably went to bed tonight feeling like he'd taught me a valuable lesson about knowing my place in the pecking order. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to maneuver. While Gerald was busy playing Daddy CEO and Sophia was shopping for designer handbags, I'd been building something they didn't even know existed. Something clean, something legal, something that would make tonight's party trick look like amateur hour. My phone buzzed again, not a text this time, but a call from Miguel Alvarez. Miguel, my old college roommate who'd gone on to become CTO at ArcVantage Labs, one of Whitmore's biggest competitors. Miguel, who'd been quietly recruiting me for months with the kind of offers that would make a grown man weep. Miguel, who'd sent me a very specific text message 2 days ago. Weather looks clear. Weather looks clear. Our old code from freshman year computer science. Back when we thought we were so clever with our secret phrases and elaborate pranks. It meant all the signatures were in place, all the legal documents filed, all the chess pieces positioned for checkmate. It meant the plan we'd been cooking up for the better part of a year was finally ready to execute. I let it ring. Not because I didn't want to talk to Miguel. Hell, talking to someone who actually respected my work sounded like heaven right about now. But because this moment deserved to be savored. This drive through the city that had watched me build something beautiful and then handed me a pink slip wrapped in tissue paper and malicious glee. The radio was playing some generic holiday music, the kind of sanitized Christmas cheer that sounds like it was focus grouped to death. I switched it off and drove in silence, listening to the hum of my engine and the whisper of tires on wet asphalt. The city looked different tonight, like I was seeing it through new eyes. Clearer eyes. Eyes that weren't clouded by loyalty or false hope or the desperate need to belong somewhere that never wanted me in the first place. I passed the Thai place where Sophia and I used to go for date nights, back when she actually wanted to spend time with someone who worked for a living instead of inherited it. Past the coffee shop where I'd had my first interview with Gerald, back when he was still pretending to care about qualifications instead of just looking for someone smart enough to build his empire and naive enough not to ask for equity. 7 years. 7 fucking years of giving that company everything I had. Every innovative idea, every breakthrough moment, every late-night epiphany that moved their stock price another few points north. And what did I have to show for it? A salary that was good but not great, a wife who laughed when her father humiliated me, and a t-shirt that summed up their opinion of my contributions in 2 simple words. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been filing patent applications under my own name for the last 18 months. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented, all the I's dotted and T's crossed by the best IP lawyer Gerald's money could buy. Ironically, the same firm that handled Whitmore's legal work, though they kept different clients in separate silos for exactly this reason. They didn't know about North Star Relay, my little LLC that rented space in a brick building across town and had been quietly licensing technology back to Whitmore under terms that looked generous until you read the fine print. They didn't know about the kill switches I'd built into every critical system, the backdoors that looked like standard administrative access, but were actually my insurance policy against exactly this kind of corporate backstabbing. Most importantly, they didn't know that the federal logistics contract Gerald loved to wave around like a trophy, the one that was supposed to cement Whitmore's position as a major government vendor, was entirely dependent on my compliance audit engine. The engine that ran on a temporary license that expired at midnight on December 31st unless certain payment and security requirements were met. Requirements that, according to my very careful documentation, Whitmore had been failing to meet for the past 6 months. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner that specialized in grease and regret, the kind of place where truck drivers and night shift workers went to carb load before facing another shift of American capitalism. The neon sign flickered between open and op-in, which felt like a metaphor for something, but I was too emotionally exhausted to figure out what. My phone lit up again, this time with a text from Sophia. Where did you go? People are asking. People are asking. Not, I'm worried about you. Or are you okay? Or even, what the hell just happened back there? Just concern about what people might think if the guest of honor at their little humiliation party had the audacity to leave early. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Everything from the honest truth about what I really thought of her family to elaborate explanations of why I couldn't stay and watch them celebrate my professional execution. In the end, I went with something simple. Needed some air. See you at home. Except I wouldn't be going home. Home was a mortgage on a house I couldn't afford without a job, shared with a wife who'd just proven that blood was thicker than marriage vows. Home was a collection of furniture and memories that belonged to a different version of me. The version that still believed hard work mattered more than birthright. That loyalty was a two-way street. That family meant something beyond shared DNA and financial convenience. Instead, I was going to drive to that brick building across town and make sure everything was ready for tomorrow's news cycle. Because if Gerald wanted to play games, I was about to show him what happened when you humiliated someone who'd spent 7 years learning all your secrets and building all your weapons. The funny thing about being stabbed in the back is that it clarifies everything. All those moments of doubt, all those times I'd wondered if I was being paranoid or oversensitive, all those little slights and overlooked contributions suddenly made perfect sense. They'd never seen me as family. They'd seen me as a useful tool, and now that they thought they didn't need me anymore, they were throwing me away with about as much ceremony as you'd give a broken stapler. But tools work both ways. And tomorrow morning, they were going to learn the difference between owning someone and needing them. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, leaving the diner's neon glow behind me as I headed toward the future I'd been building in secret. The party was over, but the real show was about to begin. The parking lot of 1247 Industrial Way looked like the kind of place where dreams go to die. Cracked asphalt, weeds growing through concrete, and a flickering streetlight that probably hadn't been serviced since the Clinton administration. But that shitty little brick building was about to become ground zero for the most expensive lesson Gerald Whitmore had ever received, and the best part was that he'd paid for it himself through 7 years of my generous salary. I slid my keycard through the reader. Yeah, that's right, keycard access to a building that looked like it should be condemned, and listened to the satisfying beep that meant I was home. Not home like the McMansion I'd been sharing with Sophia and her collection of throw pillows that cost more than most people's rent, but home like a place where I could finally stop pretending to be someone else's idea of success. The lobby, and I use that term loosely, consisted of a folding table, a dying rubber plant that I'd named Wilson after the volleyball and Castaway, and a motivational poster someone had left behind that read teamwork, because sometimes you can't do it all yourself. Ironic, considering I'd spent the last year doing exactly that while Gerald took credit and Sophia planned shopping trips to celebrate our achievements. Northstar Relay LLC occupied exactly 2 rooms and a server closet on the 2nd floor of this architectural masterpiece. Room 1 was what I generously called the conference area. A card table, 2 mismatched chairs from a garage sale, and a whiteboard covered in coffee stains and the kind of brilliant scribbles that only make sense at 3 in the morning when you're hopped up on energy drinks and pure spite. Room 2 was the development lab, which sounded way fancier than the place where I kept my good computer and a mini fridge full of Red Bull. But it was the server closet that made this whole operation worthwhile. Behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, because I had a sense of humor about these things, a rack of humming hardware connected to fiber optic cables that would make NASA jealous. This wasn't some hobbyist setup cobbled together from Amazon Basics. This was enterprise-grade equipment that I'd been accumulating piece by piece, always paying cash, always keeping the receipts, always making sure everything was legal and traceable and absolutely fucking bulletproof. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the closet door. Ozone from the servers, that metallic tang of solder from late-night hardware modifications, and just a hint of the vanilla air freshener I'd hung up to mask the fact that I'd been practically living here for months. Home sweet home, population, me and about 50,000 lines of code that were about to change everything. I powered up the main workstation and watched the screens come alive with the kind of beautiful chaos that only a systems architect could appreciate. Network diagrams that looked like electronic spider webs, database schemas that would make a mathematician weep, and monitoring dashboards that tracked every heartbeat of every system running Whitmore's precious empire. Because here's the thing about being the guy who builds the foundation. You get to decide exactly how strong that foundation really is. The corkboard above my desk told the whole story in 4 neat rows of paper. Patent application 847291, A. Distributed middleware communication layer with adaptive load balancing. Patent application 847291. B. Resilient network routing protocol with autonomous failure detection. Patent application 847291. C. Real-time compliance audit engine for federal contract verification. And my personal favorite, patent application 847291D. Machine Identity Vault with cryptographic chain of custody. All filed under my name. All assigned to Northstar Relay. All perfectly, absolutely, completely legal under the intellectual property clauses buried in page 37 of my employment contract. Clauses that Gerald's lawyers had written to protect Whitmore from employee theft, not realizing they'd created a loophole big enough to drive a fucking semi-truck through. C. When you write IP protections that say, work product developed using company resources becomes company property, you better make damn sure you define what constitutes company resources. And when the employee in question has been working nights and weekends in his own lab, using his own equipment, solving problems that the company never officially asked him to solve, well, that's when things get interesting from a legal standpoint. I'd been documenting everything for 18 months. Every email thread where Gerald pushed back my resource requests. Every budget meeting where they cut my team's funding while increasing marketing's budget for brand awareness initiatives, aka Tessa's Instagram consulting fees. Every security audit I'd recommended that got shelved because we'll deal with that next quarter. Every time they'd told me to make do with what I had while they bought themselves new offices and executive retreats to align on strategic vision. Priya Desai, my lawyer, had reviewed every filing, every assignment document, every licensing agreement with the kind of thoroughness that made her worth every penny of her ridiculous hourly rate. It's airtight, she'd told me last week over coffee in her downtown office that probably cost more per square foot than most people's apartments. They've been licensing your technology for months without knowing it. The moment they breach payment or security covenants, you can revoke access entirely. And oh, had they breached those covenants? The security requirements alone were like a greatest hits collection of corporate negligence. Unpatched systems, default passwords on critical infrastructure, administrative accounts shared via sticky notes, and my personal favorite, Owen Pike using password 123 for his CFO credentials because apparently cybersecurity was too complicated for someone making high six figures. I logged into the escrow agent's dashboard and confirmed what Miguel had been hinting at in his cryptic texts. ArcVantage's payment had cleared that afternoon. Not just cleared, but cleared big. 7 figures big. The kind of money that would let me tell Gerald Whitmore exactly where he could shove his now jobless t-shirt while wearing a smile that could power a small city. The license flip over timers were already set. Midnight tonight, Whitmore's access to my core systems would expire unless they met specific payment and security requirements that I'd been documenting their failure to meet for months. At 12:01 a.m., those same licenses would automatically transfer to ArcVantage under our exclusive partnership agreement, an agreement that Gerald would probably find out about when his morning coffee was interrupted by some very unhappy phone calls from very important government officials. I pulled up the draft email I'd been perfecting for the better part of 6 months. Every word chosen for maximum legal impact and minimum emotional satisfaction, because this wasn't about revenge, this was about business. The subject line was beautifully bland. Notice of license termination due to covenant breach. The body read like something generated by the world's most polite sociopath. Dear Whitmore Dynamics Leadership Team, per Section 9.2 of License Agreement WDL 2024-047 executed between Northstar Relay LLC and Whitmore Dynamics Incorporated. This notice serves to inform you that the temporary grace period for compliance violations will end at 0:01 Eastern Standard Time on December 23, 2024. As documented in our previous communications dated October 15, November 3, and December 1, the following covenant breaches remain unresolved. Failure to implement required security protocols, Section 4.2.a. Non-payment of quarterly licensing fees, Section 6.1.b. Unauthorized modification of core systems, Section 8.3.c. Failure to maintain required audit trails, Section 9.1.d. Effective 0/01 December 23rd, 2024, access to all Northstar Relay intellectual property will be revoked, including but not limited to the distributed middleware communication layer, resilient routing protocol, compliance audit engine, and machine identity vault. This action is taken in accordance with the terms agreed upon by both parties and is non-negotiable. Regards. Northstar Relay LLC. Beautiful, wasn't it? Cold as a morgue and twice as final. No emotion, no personal attacks, no mention of t-shirts or public humiliation or the fact that Gerald's family values were worth about as much as a Confederate dollar in a modern economy. Just pure, devastating business communication that would hit their legal department like a freight train carrying legal dynamite. The best part, the absolute chef's kiss of this whole operation, was that Gerald had been bragging about that federal logistics contract for months. The one that was supposed to prove Whitmore could handle government-level security and compliance requirements. The one that required real-time audit trails and cryptographic verification of every transaction. The one that was built entirely on my compliance audit engine and would fail spectacularly the moment that engine went dark. I opened a new tab and checked the news feeds, making sure Harper Quinn had everything she needed for her morning bombshell. Harper, the investigative business reporter who'd been sniffing around Owen Pike's creative expense reports like a bloodhound with a journalism degree. Harper, who was about to receive a very interesting collection of documents that would make her Christmas morning feel like, well, Christmas morning. Travel receipts that didn't match any legitimate business meetings. Contractor payments to shell companies that existed only on paper. Email chains where Owen pressured suppliers into marketing rebates that looked suspiciously like kickbacks when you added up the numbers. And my personal favorite, a paper trail showing how Owen had been billing his daughter's private school tuition as executive education expenses. The SEC was going to have a field day. Martha Stewart went to prison for less. I leaned back in my chair and looked around at this little kingdom I'd built in secret. Coffee-stained whiteboards covered with architectural diagrams that would revolutionize enterprise communication. Hardware that hummed with the kind of quiet confidence that came from being built right the first time. Patent filings that would make other companies pay me royalties for the next 20 years. Tomorrow morning, Gerald would wake up to a world where his golden boy son-in-law had disappeared and taken his entire technical infrastructure with him. Tomorrow morning, Sophia would realize that her husband wasn't just some grateful employee who should be happy to work for family. He was the guy who'd been keeping the lights on while her relatives played dress-up as business leaders. Tomorrow morning, they'd learn what happened when you treated talent like it was disposable and then threw it away in front of 200 witnesses. I closed the email draft and saved it to send at exactly midnight. Not because I needed the dramatic timing. This wasn't a movie, after all. But because contracts were contracts, and I'd honored every clause right up until the moment they decided to turn my termination into dinner theater. The rubber plant in the corner seemed to approve, or maybe that was just the way the server lights reflected off its leaves. Either way, Wilson had been a better colleague than most of the people I'd left behind at that party. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, taking one last look at the operation that was about to become the most expensive practical joke in corporate history. Tomorrow, I'd be back to start building something new. Something that belonged to me. Something that nobody could take away with a gift bag and a smirk. But tonight I had a few more hours to be officially employed by Whitmore Dynamics, and I planned to make the most of them. My phone lit up like a slot machine hitting jackpot, except instead of coins, I was getting a cascade of digital desperation from the Whitmore family dynasty. Sophia's name flashed across the screen first, probably calling to explain why she'd laughed along with Daddy's little comedy routine, or maybe to ask if I was being dramatic by leaving early. Like watching your husband get publicly humiliated was just another Tuesday night, and I was the one overreacting. I let it ring, then ring again, then a third time, because apparently my wife had never heard of taking a hint. The voicemail notification popped up, and I could already imagine her tone. That particular blend of condescension and fake concern she perfected during our marriage. The voice she used when she wanted to sound supportive while actually telling me I was wrong about everything. Then Gerald's name appeared, because of course it did. The man who'd just handed me a t-shirt proclaiming my unemployment in front of his entire company was now calling like we were old buddies who needed to clear the air. I watched his call go to voicemail too, then immediately light up again because Gerald Whitmore was not the kind of man who accepted being ignored by people he considered beneath him. The third caller was Tessa, and that's when I knew they were starting to panic. Princess Tessa, fresh VP of brand strategy, who probably thought her new title gave her some kind of diplomatic immunity in family disputes. Her text appeared before I could decide whether to answer. It was a joke. Lighten up, face blowing a kiss. A joke. Right. Because nothing says comedy gold like publicly firing someone at a Christmas party while their wife laughs and their coworkers applaud. Ha fucking ha, Tessa. Maybe for your next joke, you can explain that one to the SEC when they start asking questions about your well-deserved promotion and whether it had anything to do with actual qualifications or just happened to coincide with your last name. I turned off all notifications and watched my phone go silent for the first time in years. Amazing how peaceful life could be when you stopped letting other people's emergencies become your problems. No more late-night calls from Gerald demanding I fix whatever his latest hire had broken. No more texts from Sophia complaining that I worked too much while simultaneously expecting me to maintain our lifestyle on a salary that was good, but not private school for future kids, good. Instead, I dialed Priya Desai, because when you're about to detonate someone's entire business model, you want the kind of lawyer who charges $400 an hour and earns every penny of it. Priya was the type of woman who wore power suits like armor and could dissect a contract like a forensic pathologist examining a murder victim. She was also the only person in my life who'd told me the truth about what Gerald was really planning. I've been waiting for your call, she said before I could even identify myself. Her voice had that crisp efficiency that came from billing in 6-minute increments and never wasting a second of anyone's time, especially her own. I assume tonight went exactly as we predicted. T-shirt and everything. I confirmed, settling back into my car seat and watching the brick building that housed my real future. Gerald's got a real flair for the dramatic. Should have gone into theater instead of inheriting a tech company. Perfect. The afternoon wire from ArcVantage cleared escrow at 3:47 p.m. 7 figures, as promised. The second license agreement, exclusive global rights to your patent portfolio, goes live at midnight when Whitmore's access expires. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of someone who had her shit together while everyone else was stumbling around in the dark. Miguel Alvarez called my office an hour ago to confirm final details. He sounds very pleased with the arrangement. Miguel, my old college buddy who'd gone on to bigger and better things while I was busy being Gerald's favorite technical whipping boy. Miguel, who'd been quietly recruiting me for months while I was still trying to make things work with Whitmore. Miguel, who'd looked at my patent portfolio like a kid in a candy store and immediately started talking about partnership agreements and revenue sharing and all the things that happen when companies actually value innovation instead of just exploiting it. There's something else, Priya continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Harper Quinn called this afternoon. She's running the Pike story tomorrow morning. Early edition, front page of the business section. She wanted me to thank you for the documentation package. Harper Quinn, the investigative reporter who'd been circling Owen Pike like a shark that had smelled blood in the water but couldn't quite locate the source. The woman who'd built her career exposing corporate corruption and had been looking for a way into Whitmore's books for the better part of a year. The journalist who was about to receive enough evidence to keep her busy until Easter. How bad is it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd been collecting Owen's dirty laundry for months. Every questionable expense report, every suspicious vendor payment, every creative interpretation of business necessity that would make an accountant break out in hives. Bad enough to trigger an SEC inquiry, probably within the week. The shell company payments alone are worth their own investigation. Add in the vendor kickbacks and the personal expenses he's been writing off as business costs. Priya paused for dramatic effect, because even lawyers appreciated good timing. Let's just say Owen's going to need a very good criminal defense attorney, and soon. I thought about Owen at the party tonight, raising his champagne glass in my direction like he was toasting my downfall. Pompous bastard probably went home feeling like he'd participated in some kind of corporate team-building exercise, bonding with the boss by laughing at the hired help. Tomorrow he'd wake up to federal investigators asking very pointed questions about his travel expenses and vendor relationships. There's one more thing. I said, watching a security guard make his rounds through the parking lot, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like he was searching for problems that weren't there. Ray Holt warned me months ago that something was coming. Said to watch my back. Ray Holt, Whitmore's head of security, was old-school law enforcement who'd retired from the FBI to babysit corporate executives and their various legal liabilities. He'd seen enough white-collar crime to recognize the warning signs, and apparently he'd been seeing plenty of warning signs around the Whitmore family tree. Ray didn't say much. 20 years of federal service had taught him the value of keeping his mouth shut, but when he did speak, smart people listened. Watch your back, he'd told me 3 months ago, cornering me by the coffee machine during one of my rare visits to the actual office. Things are moving upstairs. Not good things. He'd walked away before I could ask for details, but the message was clear. Whatever Gerald was planning, it wasn't going to end well for me. Funny how being right doesn't make you feel better when you're the target. Ray's a smart man, Priya said, her voice carrying the kind of respect that came from dealing with too many cases where someone should have listened to the warning signs. He probably saw the writing on the wall before Gerald even started planning his little Christmas surprise. Speaking of which, you might want to prepare for some interesting phone calls over the next few days. From who? Everyone. The board will want to know how their star technology just walked out the door. Investors will want explanations for why their federal contracts are suddenly at risk. Gerald will want to negotiate, probably with threats first, then money, then more threats. And Sophia. She paused, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. Well, that's between you and your marriage counselor. Marriage counselor. Right. Because the problem with my marriage was communication issues, not the fact that my wife had just publicly chosen her family's money over basic human decency. But that was a problem for future me to solve, along with finding a new place to live and figuring out what the hell I was going to do with my life now that I'd burned down my old one. The important thing, Priya continued, is that you don't engage with any of them directly. All communication goes through me from here on out. Gerald's going to try every trick in the book: guilt, anger, intimidation, bribery, and you need to let me handle it. You've got the high ground now, but only if you don't do anything stupid. Stupid like answering Sophia's calls to hear her explain why watching her husband get destroyed was somehow funny. Stupid like listening to Gerald's threats about lawsuits and non-compete clauses that had more holes than Swiss cheese. Stupid like feeling guilty for protecting work that was legally mine while they'd been planning to screw me over for months. Don't worry, I told her, watching another security guard complete his circuit and disappear into the shadows between buildings. I'm done being stupid. That ended about 4 hours ago when they handed me that t-shirt. Good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be very interesting. I hung up and sat in the silence of my car, engine cooling with little ticking sounds that reminded me of a countdown timer. Somewhere across town, Gerald was probably sleeping the sleep of someone who thought he'd won. Sophia was probably removing her makeup and wondering why her husband was being such a drama queen about a harmless family joke. Tessa was probably posting Instagram stories about her amazing promotion and her amazing new car and her amazing life that was built on someone else's work. And Owen Pike was definitely sleeping like a man who had no idea that tomorrow morning would bring very uncomfortable questions from very serious people with federal badges. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number that just said "Security Chief says hello. Good luck tomorrow. Ray Holt." Checking in from whatever burner phone security professionals used when they wanted to send messages that wouldn't show up in corporate discovery requests. I smiled and typed back. Tell the chief thanks for the heads up. Storm's coming. Then I started the car and drove toward my motel, leaving behind the brick building that would tomorrow become the most important address in Gerald Whitmore's rapidly deteriorating life. The radio played soft rock classics, the kind of music that made everything feel like a movie montage, and for the first time in years, I felt like the hero instead of the comic relief. Tomorrow, they'd learn what happened when you confused kindness with weakness, when you mistook loyalty for stupidity, when you thought someone's value was determined by their willingness to accept abuse. Tomorrow, the weather was going to be very fucking clear indeed. 11:59 p.m. I sat in my car outside the brick building, engine off, watching the dashboard clock tick toward the moment when Gerald Whitmore's world would officially start falling apart. Funny how the most important moments in life happen when nobody's watching. No cameras, No confetti cannons, no audience of drunk executives applauding your destruction. Just me, a countdown timer, and enough digital dynamite to level a corporate empire. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Miguel, standing by. You sure about this? Was I sure? Hell yes, I was sure. I'd been sure since the moment Gerald handed me that gift bag with a smirk that said I was nothing more than entertainment for his family's amusement. I'd been sure since Sophia patted my chest like I was a good dog who'd just performed a trick. I'd been sure since 200 people laughed while I folded that t-shirt and walked away in silence. Green light, I typed back. The clock hit midnight. On my laptop screen, the escrow agent's dashboard refreshed automatically. License status, transferred. The ARC Vantage flags flipped from yellow to green like Christmas lights coming online. Every patent, every piece of code, every digital asset that had been powering Whitmore's record year now belonged to their biggest competitor. I clicked send on the termination email. Somewhere across the city, Gerald's phone was lighting up with automated alerts from systems he probably didn't even know existed. Security protocols failing. Database connections timing out. The compliance audit engine, the one that kept his precious federal contract valid, going dark like someone had pulled the plug on his life support. My phone pinged with another secure message. We're live. Press release cues at 6 a.m. Welcome to ARC Vantage. The press release. God, I'd helped Miguel craft that beautiful piece of corporate theater. ARC Vantage Labs announces exclusive partnership with Northstar Relay, expanding federal compliance capabilities. Professional, boring, and absolutely devastating once people connected the dots between my patent portfolio and Whitmore's sudden technical difficulties. I walked into the building one last time, taking the stairs to my little kingdom of servers and stolen time. The closet hummed with quiet satisfaction, all those machines processing the transition like they'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. On the main console, a tiny blue light that had been blinking yellow for months finally settled into steady blue. The hardware key had accepted its new master. It was done. In 12 hours, when Gerald dragged himself out of bed expecting another day of playing CEO with someone else's technology, he'd discover that his entire infrastructure had vanished overnight. Not stolen, transferred. Not hacked, legally revoked. Not sabotaged, just business. I grabbed the framed $2 bill from my desk, Gerald's little joke gift that was about to become my favorite decoration, and headed for the door. Tomorrow I'd be back to start the real work, building something new with Miguel and a team that actually understood the difference between innovation and inheritance. But tonight, I had one more stop to make. The Days Inn on Route 9 wasn't exactly the Four Seasons, but it had two things I needed: cable TV and a deadbolt that actually worked. I'd been calling it home for the past 3 weeks, ever since I realized that sharing a bed with someone who'd rather laugh at your humiliation than defend your dignity wasn't really what marriage was supposed to be about. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams, but at least it was honest about what it was. My phone buzzed at 5:47 a.m. with a text from Harper Quinn. We're running a package at 6:05 a.m. Hope you're ready. Ready? Lady, I'd been ready since Gerald first started treating me like his personal tech support instead of the architect who'd built his entire digital empire. I'd been ready since the first board meeting where he took credit for my innovations while I sat in the back like hired help. I'd been ready since Sophia started introducing me as my husband who works for Daddy, instead of the guy who actually made Daddy's company functional. But yeah, Harper, I was ready. I made coffee with the little machine that probably hadn't been cleaned since Bush was president, the first Bush, and settled in to watch the morning news like it was the Super Bowl and Christmas rolled into one beautiful, career-destroying package. The local station was running their usual mix of weather updates, traffic reports, and human interest stories about rescued puppies, but I knew that was about to change in about 10 minutes. 6 o'clock came and went with nothing. Then 6:02. Then 6:03. I started wondering if Harper had chickened out, if maybe Gerald's lawyers had gotten to her editor, if maybe this was all going to fizzle out like a wet firecracker on the 4th of July. Then, at 6:05 a.m. exactly, the screen flashed breaking news in letters big enough to read from space. Good morning. This is Jennifer Walsh with Channel 7 News. We're following breaking developments in a story that could have major implications for federal contracting and corporate governance. Whitmore Dynamics, the technology company that recently secured a major logistics contract with the Pentagon, is facing what sources are calling a compliance crisis following the sudden revocation of critical software licenses. They put Whitmore's logo on screen, that pretentious mountain peak design that was supposed to represent reaching new heights, but looked more like a pyramid scheme's fever dream. The same logo that had been plastered all over the Christmas party while they handed out BMWs to unqualified family members and unemployment to the guy who built their technical foundation. The company's stock has been halted pending investigation into what federal officials are describing as potential noncompliance with security protocols required for government contracts. The license revocation affects multiple core systems, including what sources describe as the backbone of Whitmore's audit and compliance infrastructure. Beautiful. Just fucking beautiful. I could picture Gerald right now, probably still in his silk pajamas, watching his company's stock price disappear while he tried to figure out how his disposable son-in-law had just nuked his entire operation from orbit. But wait, it got better. The screen cut to footage of Gerald arriving at Whitmore headquarters, and holy shit, the man looked like he'd aged about 10 years overnight. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie was crooked, and he had that deer-in-headlights expression that rich people get when reality finally catches up with their bullshit. Reporters were shouting questions at him like he was walking a perp walk instead of just going to work. Mr. Whitmore, can you comment on the license termination? Sir, how will this affect your federal contracts? What's your response to allegations of security violations? Gerald pushed through the crowd with the kind of forced smile that politicians use right before they resign in disgrace, muttering something about looking into the situation and confident in our legal position. Translation, we're fucked, and we have no idea how it happened. Then Jennifer Walsh was back, and she had that gleam in her eye that news anchors get when they know they're about to drop a bombshell that'll have everyone talking around the water cooler. But that's not the only story developing at Whitmore Dynamics this morning. Channel 7's investigative team has obtained internal documents suggesting a pattern of questionable financial practices involving Chief Financial Officer Owen Pike. And there it was. Harper's masterpiece, complete with document graphics and everything. Travel expenses that would make a Saudi prince blush. Vendor contracts with shell companies that existed only on paper. Email chains showing Owen pressuring suppliers into marketing rebates that looked suspiciously like kickbacks when you added up the numbers. My personal favorite was the graphic showing Owen's daughter's private school tuition being billed as executive education expenses, because apparently learning advanced finger painting at Manhattan Prep Academy was crucial to Whitmore's corporate strategy. The Securities and Exchange Commission has announced a preliminary inquiry into these allegations, with sources suggesting that a formal investigation could be launched as early as next week. I actually laughed out loud. Not the polite chuckle I'd been using for 7 years of corporate meetings, but real laughter that started in my chest and bubbled up like champagne. Owen Pike, the same pompous asshole who'd raised his glass to toast my humiliation, was about to become very familiar with federal prison cuisine. My phone started blowing up. Not with calls this time. Apparently they'd finally figured out that I wasn't answering, but with texts that read like a Greek chorus of corporate panic. Gene Park. They're pale as paper. Systems are degrading. Emergency board meeting in 1 hour. Some random engineer from the networking team. Dude, everything's falling apart. Half the servers are throwing errors. Even Marla from HR. Gerald screaming. Owen sweating. Tessa crying. Tessa crying. The same Tessa who'd squealed with delight over her unearned BMW and undeserved promotion was now crying because Daddy's empire was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. The same Tessa who'd texted me to lighten up about her family's little joke was probably realizing that jokes have consequences when you're dealing with someone who knows where all the digital bodies are buried. The news switched to footage of ArcVantage Labs, and there was Miguel looking calm and professional in his navy blue suit, standing next to a banner that read, "Innovation through Partnership." The reporter was asking him about his company's strategic acquisition of critical compliance technology, and Miguel was giving all the right answers about excited to serve federal clients and committed to the highest security standards. Everything Whitmore had failed to do, everything Gerald had been too arrogant to prioritize, everything they'd assumed would just keep working because it always had, Miguel was promising to do it right. With my technology, with my patents, with my expertise, properly valued and legally protected. The partnership with Northstar Relay represents a significant expansion of ArcVantage's federal compliance capabilities, Miguel was saying, and I could see him fighting to keep a straight face. We'd practiced this interview 3 times, and every run-through had ended with both of us cracking up like teenagers pulling off the perfect prank. Except this wasn't a prank. This was business. This was what happened when you treated innovation like inheritance and assumed that smart people would always be grateful for whatever scraps you threw them. This was what happened when you confused loyalty with stupidity and thought public humiliation was an appropriate management technique. The segment ended with stock footage of federal buildings and serious voice narration about increasing scrutiny of government contractors and the importance of corporate governance in sensitive industries. Translation: Gerald's about to become very popular with regulatory agencies, and not in a good way. I poured another cup of terrible coffee and checked the market futures. Whitmore Dynamics was down 18% in pre-market trading, with more bad news probably on the way once word got out about the full scope of their technical difficulties. ArcVantage, meanwhile, was up 6% on news of their federal contract expansion. My phone buzzed with one more message, this one from Sophia. What did you do? What did I do? Oh, honey, that was the wrong question. The right question was, what took me so long to do it? I stared at her message for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard while I composed and deleted about 15 different responses. Everything from detailed explanations of intellectual property law to simple statements of fact about who actually built what. In the end, I went with something that captured exactly how I felt about 7 years of being taken for granted while she shopped for furniture with money I'd earned and she'd never respected. I stopped letting people laugh while standing on my work. Send. Then I turned off my phone, cranked up the TV volume, and settled in to watch Gerald Whitmore learn the most expensive lesson of his privileged life. The coffee was still terrible, the motel room still smelled like industrial despair, and my marriage was probably over. But for the first time in years, I felt like the person I used to be before I'd started apologizing for being good at my job. And that, as they say in the business world, was priceless. Here's the beautiful thing about corporate meltdowns. You don't need to be in the room to know exactly what's happening. Panic has its own language, and when a company's entire technical infrastructure disappears overnight, that language becomes very fucking loud very fucking fast. I was sitting in a Denny's at 9 a.m., working through a stack of pancakes that tasted like cardboard soaked in corn syrup, when the first wave of intelligence started rolling in. Marla Knox from HR, the same woman who'd pretended not to see me at the party, was suddenly my new best friend via text message. Gerald screaming at IT. Owen sweating through his shirt. Tessa locked in her office crying. Emergency board meeting started 20 minutes ago. Screaming at IT. Of course he was. Because when your entire business model evaporates overnight, the natural response is to yell at the 22-year-old help desk guy like it's his fault that daddy's golden goose just flew the coop. I could picture Gerald red-faced and spittle flying, demanding to know why our systems weren't working, completely oblivious to the fact that they'd never actually been his systems in the first place. My phone buzzed again, this time from Gene Park, the floor manager who'd actually understood what I did for a living instead of just nodding politely during technical presentations. Boss man, they're dead in the water. Federal audit portal won't even load. Compliance dashboard showing nothing but error messages. Gerald just asked IT if they tried turning it off and on again. Turning it off and on again. Jesus Christ. 7 years of building enterprise-grade infrastructure, and Gerald thought the solution was the same tech support advice your grandmother gets when her email stops working. The man who'd been bragging about family excellence and innovative leadership was now troubleshooting like a suburban dad trying to fix his Wi-Fi. But wait, it got better. The federal contract. The one Gerald loved to mention in every investor call. The one that was supposed to prove Whitmore could handle government-level security requirements, was now at risk because they couldn't self-certify their compliance systems. Because those systems were mine. Because those systems were now licensed exclusively to ArcVantage. Because Gerald had been so busy planning his Christmas party humiliation theater that he'd forgotten to read the fine print on who actually owned what. Bloomberg was running a breaking news ticker at the bottom of the diner's TV. Whitmore Dynamics trading halted pending SEC review of financial irregularities. The SEC. Harper Quinn had really delivered on her promise to make Owen's life interesting. I watched the business anchor explain how federal investigators were examining a pattern of questionable expense reports and vendor relationships, while showing file footage of Owen at some industry conference, looking smug in his $1,000 suit. That same suit was probably soaked with flop sweat right about now. My phone rang, Gerald's number flashing on the screen like a distress signal from a sinking ship. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to him try to sound calm and reasonable while his world burned down around him. Look, son, I think we may have had some miscommunication last night. Why don't you come in so we can sort this out like family? Family. The magic word that was supposed to make me forget about public humiliation and focus on being grateful for the privilege of working for people who thought my value could be summed up on a novelty t-shirt. ArcVantage went live on Bloomberg 20 minutes later. Miguel looked calm and professional as he explained their exciting new partnership with innovative technology firm Northstar Relay. The anchor kept saying my name, my actual name, not Gerald's son-in-law or the guy from IT, and treating me like someone whose opinion mattered, which was a refreshing change of pace. The best part was watching Gerald's empire crumble in real time. No dramatic explosions, no movie-style confrontations. Just quiet system failures and regulatory inquiries, and the steady drip, drip, drip of consequences finally catching up with people who'd thought they were untouchable. Sophia finally texted around noon. What did you do? What did I do? Oh, sweetie, that was adorable. Like I was some kind of criminal mastermind instead of just a guy who'd finally stopped letting people steal his work while laughing about it. Like protecting intellectual property that was legally mine was somehow a betrayal instead of basic self-respect. I stared at her message for about 10 minutes, typing and deleting responses while my pancakes got cold. Everything from detailed explanations of patent law to simple statements about what happens when you treat talent like it's disposable. In the end, I went with the truth, because sometimes the truth is the sharpest weapon you can use. I stopped letting people laugh while standing on my work. Send. Gerald's call came at exactly noon, because apparently even in the middle of a corporate meltdown, the man still believed in power lunch timing. His voice had that dangerous quiet quality that rich people use when they're trying not to scream at the help in public, controlled, measured, and absolutely seething underneath. You come here now, he said, not bothering with pleasantries or even basic human decency. Just a command from the lord of the manor to his rebellious peasant, because Gerald Whitmore didn't make requests. He gave orders and expected them to be followed by people who knew their place in his carefully constructed hierarchy. No, I said, and the silence that followed was so complete I could practically hear his brain short-circuiting. But I'll meet you in the lobby in an hour. Bring your lawyer. I hung up before he could respond, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play by someone else's rules. Gerald was used to people jumping when he called, scrambling to fix his problems while he took credit for their solutions. Well, surprise, Gerald, your favorite fixer just became your biggest problem. The lobby of Whitmore Dynamics was all marble and glass and aggressive corporate masculinity, designed to intimidate visitors and remind employees exactly who signed their paychecks. Under normal circumstances, I would have felt small walking into that temple of inherited wealth and purchased power. Today, I felt like David walking into Goliath's neighborhood with a slingshot and absolutely nothing left to lose. Priya Desai arrived 10 minutes before me, looking like the kind of lawyer who charged $400 an hour and earned every penny through pure competence and calculated ruthlessness. She carried a slim folder that contained enough legal documentation to end Gerald's career and probably his legacy, all organized with the precision of someone who'd built her reputation on making powerful men very uncomfortable. Gerald showed up with his own legal team, 3 guys in identical suits who looked like they'd been cloned in some corporate law laboratory. Behind them shuffled Owen Pike, looking like a man who'd spent the morning getting acquainted with federal investigators and their very pointed questions about creative accounting practices. Bringing Owen was a tactical error, but Gerald had always confused intimidation with strategy. This is what's going to happen, Gerald started, trying to project the same authority that worked on board members and government contractors. You're going to undo whatever technical tantrum you threw last night. We're going to pretend this never happened, and maybe, we'll discuss bringing you back at a reduced salary. A reduced salary. This fucking guy. His entire company was circling the drain. Federal investigators were probably setting up camp in his CFO's office, and he was still trying to negotiate from a position of strength he didn't have. Counteroffer, I said, opening Priya's folder and laying out the documents like I was dealing cards in a poker game where I held all the aces. You acknowledge that I own the patents for every piece of technology keeping your company operational. You admit that you've been in breach of licensing agreements for 6 months. And you stop pretending this is about family loyalty instead of corporate theft. Patent applications, license agreements, payment default notices, security breach reports that I've been filing for months while they ignored every recommendation. Cease and desist orders that had already been served. The paper trail was so complete it could have been used as evidence in business school about how not to manage intellectual property. Gerald's face went through about 15 different colors before settling on a shade of pale that matched the marble floors where his employees had laughed at my humiliation just 12 hours earlier. That's when Tessa stumbled in, mascara smudged like she'd been crying for hours, looking like a kid who'd just learned that actions have consequences. "Can't you just make this go away?" she pleaded, and the desperation in her voice was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. "Almost. Make what go away, Tessa? The patents I filed legally? The contracts your father breached? The federal investigation into your CFO's creative bookkeeping? Or just the fact that your family thought you could humiliate me and I'd keep building your empire for free?" Sophia appeared behind them like a ghost at her own funeral, still wearing that silver dress from the party because apparently crisis management didn't require a costume change. Her arms were folded across her chest in that defensive posture she used when she knew she was wrong, but wasn't ready to admit it. "We're family." Gerald tried one more time, like magic words that would undo 18 months of careful legal preparation. "No," I said, standing up from the marble bench where they'd probably imagined I'd beg for forgiveness. "We're not. Family doesn't hand out unemployment notices as party favors. Family doesn't laugh while you destroy someone's career for entertainment." In the glass reflection of the lobby windows, I could see myself, tired, yes, but finally standing straight instead of hunched over in apology for existing. Finally looking like someone who knew his own worth instead of accepting whatever value other people assigned to him. "You don't get to hold the ladder and mock the person on it," I told them, gathering Priya's documents while Gerald's lawyers whispered frantically in his ear about liability and damages and all the expensive consequences of treating employees like disposable assets. Not anymore. I walked toward the exit while they stood there in their expensive clothes and inherited power, finally understanding that some bridges can't be rebuilt after you've burned them yourself. ArcVantage Labs turned out to be everything Whitmore Dynamics pretended to be. Actual innovation instead of inherited mediocrity, real teamwork instead of nepotistic circle jerks, and leadership that understood the difference between taking credit and earning it. Miguel gave me a corner office with windows that actually opened, a development team that didn't need their hands held every 5 minutes, and the kind of budget that made Whitmore's penny pinching look like exactly what it was. Rich people being cheap with other people's talent. The lab itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean workstations, state-of-the-art hardware, and coffee that didn't taste like it had been filtered through someone's gym socks. No fake snow machines or crystal chandeliers or motivational posters about synergy. Just smart people doing smart work and getting paid what they were actually worth. My first hire was Gene Park, because loyalty deserves to be rewarded when it goes both directions. I offered him a signing bonus that was more than Whitmore had given him in annual raises over 3 years, plus equity in the projects he'd actually be building instead of just maintaining. Gene took one look at the offer sheet and started laughing. The good kind of laughter, not the cruel kind I'd been subjected to at Gerald's party. "You know they're calling you Lucifer over there?" Gene told me during his first week, setting up his workstation with the kind of care that comes from finally having tools that match your skill level. "Marla from HR keeps talking about how you betrayed the family trust." Family trust. Right. Because trusting your family not to publicly humiliate you was apparently too much to ask, but expecting you to keep building their empire after they treated you like garbage was just natural family dynamics. We started a helpline for smaller vendors who'd been getting squeezed by Owen's kickback schemes. Companies that had been forced to choose between paying bribes disguised as marketing fees or losing their Whitmore contracts entirely. Turned out there were a lot of them, and they all had stories about Owen's creative interpretation of ethical business practices. My apartment above Rossetti's cafe was nothing fancy. One bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a view of the alley where they kept the dumpsters. But it was mine, paid for with clean money, and the old Italian couple who ran the cafe downstairs made the kind of coffee that actually improved your day instead of just keeping you awake. Mrs. Rossetti had adopted me like a stray cat, bringing up leftover cannoli and asking why a nice young man like me was living alone instead of with that pretty wife from the pictures. I stopped showing her pictures of Sophia after the divorce papers were filed. Harper Quinn won a state journalism award for her series on Whitmore's financial irregularities. The ceremony was covered on local news, and I watched from my little apartment while eating takeout Chinese and feeling genuinely proud of someone else's success for the first time in years. She'd taken my documentation and turned it into the kind of investigative masterpiece that actually changed things. Owen was facing federal charges, Gerald was dealing with shareholder lawsuits, and Whitmore Dynamics was hemorrhaging clients faster than a punctured pipeline. Late at night, I'd tape Gerald's $2 bill above my desk, not as a reminder of being hurt, but as a measuring stick. Never again would I accept less than my actual value. Never again would I build someone else's empire while they handed out BMWs to unqualified family members and unemployment notices to the people who actually did the work. Priya introduced me to a pro bono clinic downtown where small business founders came for help protecting their intellectual property from exactly the kind of corporate theft I'd spent 7 years enabling. Twice a month, I'd volunteer to review contracts and patent filings, helping other people avoid the mistake I'd made of trusting family to treat you like family. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't personal. It's making sure the next guy doesn't get screwed the same way you did. 1 year later, I was hosting my own Christmas party in the ArcVantage lab. And holy shit, what a difference a year makes when you're surrounded by people who actually deserve to be there. Miguel brought his famous tamales, the ones his grandmother taught him to make before she died, not some catered nonsense from a company that charged by the fancy napkin. Jean had somehow managed to rig the coffee machine to dispense hot chocolate, because apparently being a networking genius also made you a beverage wizard. Priya showed up with a bottle of champagne that cost more than most people's car payments. And Harper Quinn brought her journalism award because she was proud of it and wanted to share the moment with people who'd helped make it possible. Even Mrs. Rossetti from downstairs had joined us, carrying a tray of her legendary cannoli and complaining in her thick Brooklyn accent about how we were all too skinny and needed to eat more. "You boys work too hard," she kept saying, forcing second helpings on everyone while the news played softly in the background. It was the kind of Christmas gathering that actually felt like celebration instead of corporate theater. Real laughter instead of the performative bullshit I'd endured at Whitmore's Crystal Palace. People who were there because they wanted to be, not because their paychecks depended on it. That's when the breaking news alert cut through our conversation like a knife through wrapping paper. Whitmore Dynamics to be acquired in distress sale following year-long compliance crisis and federal investigation. Stock down 73% from pre-crisis highs. The room went quiet except for the soft hum of servers and Miguel's barely suppressed snort of laughter. On screen, they were showing file footage of the Whitmore building, the same glass tower where I'd spent 7 years building other people's dreams while they planned my destruction. Catastrophic dependency on revoked intellectual property licenses, the anchor was saying, reading from notes like she was delivering someone's obituary. Regulatory penalties have frozen the company's federal contracting pipeline, while ongoing SEC investigations into financial irregularities have spooked investors and triggered multiple shareholder lawsuits. My phone buzzed with a group text to the old Whitmore family thread, the one I'd forgotten to leave because, honestly, I'd been too busy succeeding to remember they existed. Gerald had written, "Turn on the news." I pictured them sitting in that marble atrium where they'd laughed at my expense 12 months ago. The same floor that was probably now reflecting a row of gray faces as they watched their empire get sold off piece by piece to pay for Gerald's mistakes and Owen's legal fees. The same chandelier that had sparkled above their cruel laughter, now lighting up their corporate funeral. Tessa was probably crying again. Real tears this time, not the fake drama she'd performed when her unearned promotion couldn't protect her from the consequences of treating people like entertainment. Sophia was probably wondering if she should have defended her husband instead of her family's money. But that ship had sailed the moment she chose to laugh instead of stand up. I looked at the tiny $2 bill in its frame on my desk. Gerald's joke gift that had become my favorite reminder of exactly how much I was worth to people who thought net worth was the only worth that mattered. That wrinkled piece of legal tinder had watched me build something real, something mine, something that nobody could take away with a gift bag and a smirk. Miguel raised his champagne glass in a toast that felt nothing like Owen Pike's mocking gesture from that awful night. To building things that last, he said, and everyone clinked glasses while the TV droned on about distressed sales and federal penalties and the spectacular fall of people who'd confused inheritance with intelligence. Harper was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "You know what the best part is?" she said, gesturing at the screen where financial analysts were dissecting Whitmore's collapse with surgical precision. "They're using your patents as case studies in business schools now. How to protect intellectual property in corporate partnerships. You're literally teaching the next generation how not to get screwed." Mrs. Rossetti patted my shoulder with flour-dusted hands and said something in Italian that I'm pretty sure translated to "good for you, kid." She'd never understood exactly what I did for a living, but she understood the difference between people who worked for what they had and people who just expected it to be handed to them. I didn't need their applause anymore. Didn't need Gerald's approval or Sophia's validation or Tessa's fake friendship. I had something better, a team that respected my work, a future I'd built with my own hands, and the satisfaction of knowing that they'd finally learned what value looks like. It just took destroying their lives to teach them the lesson.